diver surfaced and immediately said, "The current is like a hurricane, but only at one point. 20 years of working in British rivers, and he'd never encountered anything like it. 10-meter radius. The rest of the water is calm." The Yorkshire and Humber dive and search team specialist took off his wetsuit with trembling hands. The November air burned his wet skin, but it wasn't the cold. In 2 decades of service, he'd been down in the most dangerous waters of northern England, working in zero visibility and strong currents. The River Ouse was a familiar working environment for him. But what he encountered at a depth of 3 meters at Skeldergate Bridge was beyond the laws of physics. It's like a funnel, but without a center. The current hits in all directions at once. He pointed to the calm surface of the water, and here it's normal. A flood is like a flood. 24 hours ago, 29-year-old Rory Johnson Hatfield was an ordinary engineer from Skipton, traveling to York on official business. His room at the York Central Travelodge Hotel on Piccadilly was awaiting his return, and colleagues in the office were preparing for a working meeting on the morning of the 20th of November, 2015. Nothing heralded disaster. Rory had been working for an engineering company for 6 years. His colleagues knew him as a reliable professional who was never late and always alerted to any changes in plans. Travel was part of his job, and he knew York well enough to feel confident even late at night. The search operation has unfolded with frightening speed. North Yorkshire Police, a specialist underwater search team, and volunteers from the charity York Rescue Boat joined in. Their red and yellow life jackets flashed between the stone piers of the medieval Skeldergate Bridge. Sonars methodically scoured the riverbed, and radios crackled with the incessant chatter of rescue services. But already in the first hours of the investigation, the tensions that would haunt the operation for months to come became apparent. The police formulated their main theory with suspicious haste: a water accident. One North Yorkshire police inspector later admitted that his gut feeling was that Rory had ended up in the river. This certainty, based on assumptions rather than facts, shaped the entire search operation. The missing man's family was incredulous at the haste. They knew Rory as a cautious man who avoided risky situations. The idea that he could have been in the water by accident seemed implausible to them. This mistrust laid the groundwork for a parallel investigation that the family would pursue on their own for years to come. Rory sent his last message to his colleagues at 23:30. "Meet me at the office tomorrow." Short, businesslike, with no hint of any problems or worries. After that, he decided to take a walk around the center of York before returning to the hotel. The weather was typical for November, cool but no precipitation. The streets were well lit, the neighborhood was safe and touristy. Rory was sober, dressed for the weather, and had his mobile phone with him. It looked like a normal evening stroll through a familiar city. York Rescue Services had a solid track record on the River Ouse. York Rescue Boat had been operating for over 10 years, and their volunteers knew every bend in the river, every dangerous spot. The Yorkshire and Humber Underwater Search and Rescue Squad was regarded as one of the best in northern England. Their equipment was regularly maintained, their protocols practiced to the point of automaticity. The latest generation of sonars could detect objects the size of a human body, even in murky water. GPS navigation provided positioning accuracy of up to 1 meter. Radio communication between all participants in the operation worked in a constant mode. The system looked reliable and proven. The original plan of operation seemed logical and coherent. The CCTV cameras clearly indicated the search area, Skeldergate Bridge, and the surrounding water area. The time frame was defined to the minute. The weather conditions, although complicated by flooding, did not appear to be critical for experienced specialists. No one could have predicted that a standard search and rescue operation would encounter phenomena that would call into question the basic principles of rescue services. No one expected that reliable equipment would begin to give contradictory readings, and physical laws would cease to work as usual. The morning of the 20th of November, 2015, began with a phone call to the company's office in Skipton. Rory hadn't turned up for a working meeting. The secretary tried his mobile phone. It was unavailable. At 11 o'clock in the morning, colleagues were seriously worried. A call to York Central Travelodge brought disturbing news. Mr. Johnson Hatfield had not spent the night in his room. The bed had not been touched. His personal belongings were in place, and the room key had not been handed in at reception. The hotel receptionist remembered clearly. The guest had left in the evening and never returned. By 14 o'clock, relatives had formally reported the man missing to North Yorkshire Police. The duty inspector immediately instructed them to start analyzing CCTV footage in the center of York. Standard procedure in a disappearance is to reconstruct the last known movements of the missing person. Working with the video material took less than 2 hours. York's city surveillance system covered almost all the main streets of the historic center. Specialists quickly spotted Rory on several recordings, identified him by his clothes and characteristic gait. At 0:32, he appeared in Tower Street, walking leisurely past the medieval Clifford Tower. Calm movements, hands in his jacket pockets, no sign of anxiety or hurry. An ordinary man on an ordinary evening strolled through the tourist district. The following entry is dated 0:47. Rory is recorded in the neighborhood of City Mills, on the opposite bank of the River Ouse. Again the quiet movement, the same posture, the same clothes. But between these 2 points lay 15 minutes of emptiness that changed the fate of the entire search operation. There is only one logical route between Tower Street and the City Mills area, over Skeldergate Bridge. The medieval stone bridge, one of the oldest in York, is equipped with a state-of-the-art CCTV system. The cameras are installed to record all pedestrians crossing the river. Police technicians checked the recording from the bridge 3 times. The time range from 0:32 to 0:47 was blank. Not black screen, not static, just no data for that particular 15 minutes. Before and after this period, the camera worked properly, capturing the occasional night passerby and passing cars. "There's no such thing," muttered the lead technician, rechecking the surveillance system's hard drive. The equipment had been installed only a year ago, regularly serviced, and had backup power. Failures were logged automatically, but there was no record of a malfunction in the logs. The data has not been corrupted. They were not deleted. They didn't exist. As if for 15 minutes the camera had simply stopped perceiving reality. North Yorkshire Police immediately formulated a working hypothesis. Rory had crossed the bridge and fallen into the river. Perhaps he slipped on the wet stones of the embankment. Perhaps he felt ill. The river is in flood stage. The current is strong. Visibility in the water is virtually nil. A typical water accident. By 17 o'clock, the Yorkshire and Humber Underwater Search and Maritime Unit had joined the operation. Their sonar equipment arrived at Skeldergate Bridge an hour later. York Rescue Boat put out a boat on duty to ensure the safety of the divers. The operation coordinator requested GPS coordinates of the proposed search area from all participating services. Responses were received within 10 minutes, and then the first anomaly appeared, which called into question the reliability of the entire technical system. North Yorkshire Police gave the coordinates as 54 degrees, 5 minutes, 47 seconds north latitude, 1 degree, 4 minutes, 31 seconds west, longitude. The underwater search party transmitted their data. 54 degrees, 5 minutes. And 49 seconds north, latitude, 1 degree 4 minutes, and 29 seconds west. Longitude, York Rescue Boat reported the third option. 54 degrees, 5 minutes, 45 seconds north latitude, 1 degree, 4 minutes, 33 seconds west, longitude. The spread was 200 meters. For a search and rescue operation, this was a huge error that could have cost a human life. There was a perplexed silence on the radio. Each service double-checked its equipment. GPS receivers showed a stable signal. The number of connected satellites was sufficient for accurate positioning. The error should not exceed 3 meters. "Check again," relayed the operations coordinator. The response was the same. 3 different services operating at the same location were getting 3 different sets of coordinates for the same point on Skeldergate Bridge. The sonar operator deployed sonar and began scanning the river bottom in the area indicated by the police. The screen showed the usual pattern: a flat bottom with some minor irregularities, a few large rocks, a submerged tree branch. Nothing that could match a human body. The York Rescue Boat moved to the point their GPS indicated. A volunteer with a life preserver in hand scrutinized the surface of the water. There were no visible marks, no floating objects, no oil stains or other liquids that might have floated up from the pockets of clothing. The diver was already putting on his wetsuit when the coordinator decided to postpone the dive until the reasons for the discrepancy in the GPS data were clarified. In 20 years of working in rescue services, he had never encountered a situation where modern navigation equipment gave such contradictory readings. "Maybe solar activity," suggested one of the York Rescue Boat volunteers, "or military testing somewhere nearby." The test took half an hour. The Earth's magnetic field was stable, and no geomagnetic storms were observed. There were no military exercises within a 100-kilometer radius. All other GPS receivers in York worked normally, without anomalies or failures. The problem was only in the Skeldergate Bridge area, and only on this particular day. The decision is made to start the search despite the technical anomaly. Human life is more important than mysterious instrument readings. The diver lowered himself into the water in the area where all 3 GPS coordinates converged, approximately midway between the points indicated by the different services. The first dive lasted 12 minutes. The diver surfaced with bewilderment in his eyes, ripped off his mask, and uttered a phrase that dramatically changed the nature of the entire operation. "The current is like a hurricane, but only at one point." An underwater searcher described a phenomenon he encountered at a depth of 3 meters. Within a radius of about 10 meters from the central search point, the water was moving at tremendous speed, creating chaotic swirls. The current was beating in all directions at once, up, down, horizontally. It was almost impossible to stay in this zone. "It's like a washing machine underwater," he explained to his colleagues. "But if you swim 15 meters out, it's calm. It's just a normal flood, nothing special." The phenomenon had no logical explanation. The River Uz in the area of Skeldergate Bridge has a flat bottom with no significant depth differences. No underwater obstructions that could create turbulence of this magnitude. No discharge pipes or underwater structures. The operation coordinator decided to widen the search area. If Rory had indeed fallen into the water at this location, the strong current could have carried the body a considerable distance down the river. Humberside police joined the operation to organize a search along a 36-mile stretch of coastline to the town of Goole. Bolton Mountain Rescue Team were asked to provide search dogs and specialists to work in difficult terrain. Volunteers were needed to comb the coastal area, checking for any places where the body could have become snagged on snags or stuck in coastal vegetation. Rory's family were informed that a major search operation had been launched. The missing man's father immediately traveled to York. The mother set up a Facebook page called Rory Johnson Hatfield is Missing and began spreading the word via social media. By the end of the first day of the search, the page had gained more than 500 members. By the end of the week, the number had risen to over 10,000. A month later, the number had reached 20,000, making the search for Rory one of the largest crowdsourcing operations in the history of the British rescue services. The official operation now existed in parallel with the popular movement. Two different logics, two different approaches, two different assessments of the situation. The police insisted on the version of a water accident. The family and the internet community considered alternative scenarios: voluntary disappearance, a crime, an accident away from the river. A contradiction that started as a technical problem with GPS coordinates turned into a fundamental difference of opinion about the nature of the incident. The search and rescue operation became an open-ended investigation with multiple versions of events. The underwater search operation was forced to radically change tactics. The standard procedure, methodical bottom scanning, followed by diving by divers, proved to be inapplicable in conditions of local turbulence. The operation coordinator decided to create an extended search perimeter. The sonar was moved to a safe distance from the anomalous zone. The operator started scanning in a spiral, gradually increasing the radius. The screen showed a familiar picture of the river bottom: muddy sediments, rocks, sunken tree branches, but no objects that could match the human body. York Rescue Boat deployed 2 additional boats to patrol the water area downstream. Volunteers with binoculars methodically inspected the water surface, coastal vegetation, and places of possible blockages. Experience suggested that if a person fell into the river during a flood, a body could turn up several days later at a considerable distance from the point of fall. Humberside Police allocated a team of 12 people to the ground search. They were joined by 8 volunteers from Bolton Mountain Rescue Team, with 3 specially trained search dogs. 36 miles of coastline from York to the estuary at Goole was to be searched on foot. The search was divided into sectors of 2 kilometers each. Each group received a GPS navigator, a radio station, and a detailed map of the area, with potentially dangerous areas marked: old moorings, abandoned bridges, places with fast currents. The work was designed for a week, provided the weather was favorable. But the weather did not favor the operation. November rains turned the coastal paths into a muddy mess. The water level in the river continued to rise, flooding the usually dry parts of the bank. Search dogs lost track in the water. Volunteers got stuck in the wet clay. Visibility was reduced due to fog and drizzle. By the end of the first week, only 60% of the planned area had been surveyed. The result was nil. No traces, no personal belongings, no witnesses who had seen anything unusual on the night of the disappearance. December of the year 2015 turned the search operation into an exhausting chore. The river ooze remained in flood stage, making underwater work extremely dangerous. York Rescue Boat officially warned against attempting a search on their own after Rory's father appealed to private boat owners via Facebook for help. The water level is critical. The current is unpredictable, warned the rescue organization's director. We cannot guarantee the safety of untrained volunteers in the current conditions. Rory's family was not about to give up. The Rory Johnson Hatfield is Missing page became the center for coordinating a parallel investigation. Every day, dozens of messages came in from people willing to help. Some offered technical expertise, some offered financial support, some offered their own time to participate in the search. Rory's mother organized round-the-clock social media monitoring, checking every mention of her son's name online. His father personally went round hotels, bars, and restaurants in York, showing the photograph and asking the staff, Family friends printed leaflets and posted them at bus stops, shopping centers, and train stations. Meanwhile, the official police operation was on standby. Active searches were suspended until weather conditions improved. Underwater equipment was mothballed, and most personnel were reassigned to other tasks. The Rory Johnson Hatfield case was given the status of an open investigation, a wording that meant a willingness to resume work if new information became available. The North Yorkshire police inspector in charge of the investigation was in regular contact with the family, but could report little progress. Witness statements were not available. CCTV footage outside the town centre provided no further information. Analyses of Rory's phone records and bank transactions revealed nothing suspicious. "We are continuing to work on all possible fronts," he assured relatives of the missing man. "But I have to be honest. Without new facts or evidence, it's difficult for us to move forward." The family was not satisfied with such explanations. The absence of a body after an extensive search of the river gave them reason to doubt the main theory. Maybe Rory didn't fall into the water at all. He may have gone voluntarily. Perhaps he was the victim of a crime unrelated to the river. These doubts were fueled by every day of fruitless searching, every week of silence, every month of uncertainty. January of the year 2016 brought the first signs of fatigue among the volunteers. The enthusiasm of the first weeks gradually faded under the weight of everyday reality. The search became a monotonous job with no visible results. The specialists of the underwater search team faced a professional crisis. Over 20 years of work, they had grown accustomed to trusting their equipment and experience. GPS navigation, sonar systems, underwater communications, all of this formed the basis of their work. When the equipment began to give conflicting readings, it undermined their confidence in their own abilities. "Maybe we're missing something," pondered the squad's lead diver during the briefing. "Maybe the problem isn't the equipment, but our understanding of the situation." An anomalous current in the area of Skeldergate Bridge continued to be a mystery. Attempts to explain the phenomenon with the help of hydrologists from the University of York failed. A professor of the Department of Water Resources personally inspected the site of the alleged fall, studied the topography of the bottom, and analyzed data on the flow of water in the river in recent years. "There should be no such localized turbulence at this location," he concluded after a 3-day survey. "The bottom is flat, there are no obstacles, the depth is constant. From a hydrodynamic point of view, there are no preconditions for the formation of such a current." Nevertheless, every dive attempt within 10 meters of the central search point ended the same way. The divers were literally thrown out of the turbulence zone. It was physically impossible to stay there for more than a minute. York Rescue Boat decided to temporarily cease escorting underwater operations in the area. The risk to its own personnel had become unreasonably high. "We cannot guarantee the safety of the operation in conditions that defy logical explanation," the organization's director officially stated. North Yorkshire Police found itself in a difficult position. On the one hand, it was necessary to continue investigating a missing person. On the other hand, all traditional search methods were failing. Equipment was failing, natural conditions were hindering the work, and no new leads were emerging. Rory's family perceived the suspension of the official search as a surrender. The Facebook group began to receive critical comments about law enforcement. Some participants accused the police of insufficient efforts. Others suggested a cover-up. And still others put forward conspiracy theories. "They were too quick to jump to the conclusion of falling into the river," Rory's mother wrote in one of the posts. "And now they don't want to admit they may have been wrong." The psychological pressure was increasing day by day. The family lived in a constant waiting mode. News, calls, social media posts. Any information, even the most insignificant, was perceived as a potential breakthrough in the investigation. March 2016 was a turning point in the history of the search for Rory Johnson Hatfield. The family decided to organize their own large-scale search operation without waiting for the resumption of official activities. By that time, the Facebook page had already attracted 18,000 participants. Among them were professional rescuers, retired police officers, search and rescue volunteers, and simply people who cared. Rory's mother was able to mobilize this resource for a volunteer ground search. The plan was simple and logical. Divide the area surrounding the river into quadrants, appoint a person responsible for each quadrant, and ensure coordination via the internet and mobile phones. The focus was not on the river itself, but on the neighborhood. Abandoned buildings, industrial facilities, private gardens and orchards, places that an official search operation might have missed. The first volunteer trip was scheduled for Saturday, the 12th of March. 40 people gathered, far more than the family expected. Participants received printed maps, contact numbers, and safety instructions. The search was to cover the City Mills area, the last place where CCTV cameras had recorded Rory. The work began at 9 in the morning. Groups of 3 or 4 people methodically inspected every yard, every barn, every outbuilding. The property owners were generally understanding, allowing the inspection of cellars and attics and providing keys to the locks. By lunchtime, about half of the planned area had been checked. The result was still nil, but the enthusiasm did not wane. People realized that they were doing what the police should have done, but for some reason did not. At 14:30, a call came in from one of the search teams. A woman's voice, excited but clear. "We found a jacket. It matches the description." The coordinator of the operation, Rory's father, traveled immediately to the location. The address was 5 kilometers upstream from Skeldergate Bridge, in the grounds of a private house with a garden overlooking the river. The jacket lay on the ground beside an old wooden bench under a rakish bush. It was dark blue, sized for Rory's height and build, and the fit and manufacturer matched the description the family had given. Rory's father recognized it instantly. It was the same jacket his son had left the hotel in the night he disappeared. On the left sleeve was a small stain of machine oil that had appeared a year ago during car repairs. The zip has a distinctive scuff mark from frequent use, but the circumstances of the find defied all logic. The jacket was dry. The zip was fastened all the way to the top. The pockets were empty, but the contents didn't look stolen. No ripped seams, no signs of forced entry. The fabric was clean, without the dirt or silt stains that would inevitably appear with prolonged outdoor exposure. The strangest part is the location. 5 kilometers upstream from where it was supposed to have fallen into the river. In a flood, the water moves strictly downstream, taking all floating objects with it. The only way the jacket could have been upstream is if Rory had never fallen into the water near Skeldergate Bridge. The discovery overturned the entire logic of the search operation. The official version received the first serious crack. The discovery of the jacket in March 2016 should have been a breakthrough in the investigation. Instead, it only deepened the contradictions between the official story and the facts. North Yorkshire police scrutinized the physical evidence, but were unable to explain its appearance 5 kilometers upstream from the alleged site of the fall. Perhaps the jacket was blown away by the wind, suggested the lead inspector, or it was moved by people, casual passers-by who found the item on the beach and took it to another location. Rory's family was not satisfied with this explanation. The jacket was dry and clean, which ruled out prolonged outdoor exposure during the November rains. The zip was fastened, a detail that contradicted the theory of accidental loss by falling into the water. The pockets were empty, but with no signs of forced emptying. Tissue examination revealed no traces of river water, silt, or algae. However, microparticles of soil typical of garden plots, peat, humus, mineral fertilizers, were found. The jacket had obviously been in a dry place, protected from moisture. By the summer of 2016, the official search had effectively ceased. The Yorkshire and Humber Underwater Search and Rescue Team had moved on to other tasks. The York rescue boat continued to patrol the river as normal, but there were no more specialized activities to find Rory. Bolton Mountain Rescue Team have completed a survey of a 36-mile stretch of coastline. The result was 0 finds relating to the missing person. Search dogs have not found any footprints that could indicate the presence of a person in the coastal area. "We've checked all available locations," the ground operation coordinator reported. If Rory fell into the river in the York area, his body should have surfaced somewhere between the city and the estuary. In 8 months of searching, we found nothing. The statistics were merciless. 14 people had drowned in the River Ouse in the previous 10 years. In all cases, the bodies had been found within the first fortnight of the incident. The maximum time it took to locate a drowning victim was 23 days. Rory disappeared 8 months ago. The family continued to search on their own, but the enthusiasm of the volunteers faded. The Facebook group, Rory Johnson Hatfield is Missing, turned from a tool for coordinating search operations into a forum for discussing theories and theories. There were fewer active members, fewer posts, and no new leads were coming in. Rory's mother wrote in her diary, 8 months of uncertainty, torture, real torture. We can neither bury our son nor hope for his return. Living in limbo, not knowing whether to cry or wait. May 2017. A year and a half after Rory's disappearance, North Yorkshire Police decide to carry out a second sonar scan of the River Ouse. The official reason was a routine check, unrelated to any new information on the case. Unofficially, it was an attempt to put a definitive end to the investigation. The operation involved the Yorkshire and Humber Regional Underwater Search Team with upgraded equipment. The new sonars were more sensitive and could detect objects that had previously gone undetected. The scanning area covered the area from Skeldergate Bridge to Neighbourne Loch, 8 kilometers of riverbed. Work began in the early morning. The sonar operator methodically scoured the seabed, recording each anomaly on a detailed map. The screen showed familiar shapes, sunken logs, metal structures, large rocks, clumps of debris. But after 2 hours of scanning, it was obvious that something had changed. The seabed topography in the Skeldergate Bridge area looked different from a year and a half ago. The objects that had been recorded during the first search had disappeared. New ones had appeared in places that had previously been empty. "Check the archive data," the operations coordinator asked. The technician pulled up the files for November 2015 and overlaid them with the current scan results. The differences were obvious, even to a layman. A large sunken tree trunk, which was located 50 meters downstream of the bridge, had moved to the opposite side of the channel. A metal structure, possibly the remains of an old jetty, had moved upstream by 100 meters. The cluster of large stones on the right bank had virtually disappeared. "There's no such thing," muttered the sonar operator, comparing the data. "Erosion doesn't work that fast, and the current can't move objects that size against its direction." Attempts to find a rational explanation failed. Hydrologists from the University of York studied data on water levels, current strength, and precipitation over the past period. No extreme floods that could have dramatically changed the riverbed were observed. Underwater archaeologists have suggested the possibility of unauthorized excavations. Someone could excavate the river bottom in search of historical artifacts, but such work required special permits heavy equipment, and a long time. No applications for underwater work in this area have been filed in the last 3 years. Geophysicists considered ground movement due to karst processes or anthropogenic impact. However, a detailed study of the geological structure of the seabed did not reveal any signs of underground voids or soil instability. Changes in the topography of the riverbed remain unexplained. Like the GPS anomalies from a year and a half ago, like the missing CCTV footage, as did the anomalous currents observed by divers. North Yorkshire Police have formally concluded the death of Rory Johnson Hatfield is being treated as a water accident. It is not possible to establish the exact circumstances of the incident. The investigation remains open. The Facebook page, Rory Johnson Hatfield is Missing, continues to exist. 20,000 members have become a stable community of people who do not accept the official version of what happened. Every month there are new posts with analyses of the available facts, alternative theories, and calls to continue the search. Rory's family has set up a charity to support search and rescue services. York Rescue Boat received funding to purchase new equipment, such as modern wetsuits, underwater lights, and radios. Bolton Mountain Rescue Team was able to purchase additional equipment for search dogs. "We can't bring Rory back," his mother said at the equipment handover ceremony, "but we can help other families avoid the uncertainty we've been living with for 3 years." North Yorkshire Police periodically receive reports of possible leads in the Rory Johnson Hatfield case. Someone has seen a similar man in another town. Someone has found a personal item. Someone remembers a suspicious detail from that November night. Every report is checked, but the result is invariably negative. In May of 2019, the family received Rory's official death certificate, a formality necessary to settle legal and financial matters. But psychologically, it didn't bring relief. There were too many unanswered questions. What happened in those 15 minutes between the 2 CCTV recordings? Why did the data from the Skeldergate Bridge camera disappear at precisely the critical moment? How do we explain the discrepancy in GPS coordinates between the different rescue services? What was creating the anomalous current at the bottom of the river observed by divers? Why was Rory's jacket found dry and clean 5 kilometers upstream of the suspected fall site? What forces changed the topography of the riverbed in the year and a half between the 2 sonar scans? These questions have no answers. The official version of a water accident does not explain any of the recorded contradictions. Alternative theories, voluntary disappearance, crime, accident away from the river, are also not supported by concrete evidence. The story of Rory Johnson Hatfield remains an open mystery, a case when modern technical means, professional experience of rescue services, and persistence of relatives were powerless against phenomena that do not fit into the framework of ordinary logic. Perhaps the truth is simpler than it seems. Perhaps there was a chain of coincidences that created an illusion of mystery where there was an ordinary tragedy. Perhaps technology failed at the most inopportune moment, and human perception added mystical details to a sad but explainable story. Or perhaps there are phenomena that science is not yet ready to explain. Areas where the usual laws of physics work differently. Moments when reality becomes stranger than we are used to believe. 20,000 members of the Facebook group, Rory Johnson Hatfield is Missing, continue to search for answers. Every day, someone posts a new theory, a new version, a new hope that the mystery of Rory's disappearance will be solved. The search operation is over. The investigation remains open. The story continues. On the morning of the 16th of December, 2024, a car was found abandoned on the side of Interstate 140 in Tennessee. Its owner, Ronald Dumas Jr., had disappeared without a trace. But the most disturbing and inexplicable detail was his mobile phone. According to the cellular network, at the very time that the empty car was parked on the side of the road, the phone kept traveling west at 60 miles per hour, moving further and further away. This digital ghost, traveling down the highway separate from its owner, was the first paradox in a case where logic and common sense would continually give way to an unsolvable mystery. This story was not born in a remote taiga or on an island lost in the ocean. It was born in the heart of the American South, in Huntsville, Alabama, in the quiet bustle of the days before Christmas. Ronald Dumas' world was a world of light-filled streets, family dinners, and successful property deals. Nothing in his measured life foreshadowed a collision with the violent, irrational force that awaited him outside the liquor shop that evening. Tragedy rarely warns of its visit, and it is its mundane beginnings that make it especially frightening. At the center of this paradox was the man least suited to be the victim of mysterious circumstances. 37-year-old Ronald Leslie Dumas Jr. was a pillar of his family and community. A successful realtor, a caring father of 3, he was a man predictable in the best sense of the word. His loved ones would dismiss any version of his voluntary disappearance from the beginning, repeating the same phrase as an unshakable truth. He would never abandon his children. This characterization will be the starting point for the whole investigation. If a man like Ronnie has disappeared, then something extraordinary has happened. But it was here, in the first hours, that the first, almost invisible rift emerged. A rift between the family's intuition and official protocol. When news of the abandoned car in another state reached the Huntsville Police Department, the reaction was subdued. To them, it was a missing adult male case. There are hundreds of such cases. The protocol demanded proof, facts, evidence that pointed to a crime. And there wasn't any. The family had a different kind of evidence that could not be admitted into the record. A deep, intuitive knowledge of Ronald's character. They sensed from the first moments that disaster had struck, but their fears were shattered by a wall of procedural caution. This conflict, this discrepancy between premonition and protocol, defined the first, most precious days of the investigation, when the trail had yet to cool. The family cried out for a kidnapping, while the police continued to consider the theory that Ronald Dumas had simply left on his own. The 15th of December in the year 2024 was the last day when Ronald Dumas's life was subject to the usual order. The events of that day, reconstructed minute by minute, seemed so ordinary that their subsequent tragic ending looks even more monstrous. He spent the day with his eldest son Kai. They went shopping, bought clothes, talked about trifles. Around 8 o'clock in the evening, Ronald took his son home to his mother, Shekaria Samples. It was the last time the son saw his father. Around 10 o'clock in the evening, Shekaria phoned Ronald. A short, non-committal conversation to thank him for shopping. She recalled later that voices could be heard in the background, which meant he wasn't alone or at home. It was their last conversation. At the same time, his friend Chris Godsey was waiting for him at Dave and Buster's bar, where they had agreed to meet. But the seat at the table next to Chris remained empty. Ronald didn't show up or call to cancel, which was totally unlike him. His plans for the evening had been disrupted by someone or something that none of his loved ones suspected. The last documentary evidence of his former life was a silent CCTV recording. On the 15th of December, shortly before 11:30 in the evening, Ronald left a liquor shop on University Drive in the company of 2 women. The police report would later dryly record a key detail. Dumas did not appear to be under stress. That deceptive calm, frozen in grainy footage, was the last thing the camera lens saw. Hours later, his car would pull over on the side of the road in another state, and his phone would continue its ghostly journey west, taking all the answers with it. But it is on this footage, which police initially deemed of little significance, that a private investigator hired by the family would later discern something more. A detail that will make investigators realize they are not dealing with a simple disappearance, but with a cold, calculated, and pre-planned conspiracy. The trigger that set off the chain of irreversible events went off, silently and mundanely, as a true catastrophe should. On the morning of the 16th of December, 2024, a Tennessee Highway Patrol officer found a black Hyundai Palisade parked on the side of mile 133 of Interstate I-40. It was routine for the patrol officer, an abandoned vehicle obstructing traffic. He performed a standard inspection. No one inside, no signs of forced entry or struggle. Personal belongings seemed to be in place. The car was towed to an impound lot in Camden, Tennessee. There was no mention of a crime in the initial report. It was just an obstruction in the road. News of the car reached the Dumas family, and in that moment, their world split. For them, this was not just an abandoned car. It was a flare, a cry for help. The place where the car was found was nearly 2 hours from Huntsville, in a state completely foreign to Ronald. He had never mentioned plans to travel to Tennessee. The family began calling hospitals, morgues, police stations. All they heard in response was silence and polite sympathy. On the 17th of December, unable to bear the unknown any longer, they officially reported Ronald Dumas missing to the Huntsville Police Department. It was at this point that the usual traffic procedure began to slowly, too slowly, turn into an investigation. It was then that the investigators, after requesting data on the location of Ronald's mobile phone, were confronted with the first fact that could not be explained logically. The data showed that at 6 hours and 8 minutes on the morning of the 16th of December, the phone was traveling west on I-40, passing the very spot where his car was later found. It continued to move at the speed of the car, while the car itself was already standing empty on the side of the road. This digital footprint, severed from its physical carrier, was the first irrefutable evidence that a third party was involved. The person whose car broke down stays by his side. Ronald Dumas's phone continued on its journey without him. It was no longer a question of whether it had gone off on its own. The question was who and in what car was taking him, or at least his phone, further and further west. While the official investigation moved with bureaucratic slowness, the family, driven by desperation and a deep knowledge of their loved one, sprang into action. They felt that the police were missing something important. On the 29th of December, gathering a posse of more than 45 volunteers, they returned to the same spot at mile 133 of I-40. The police had already examined the car, but the family wanted to examine the ground, the curb, every inch of space where Ronnie's car had last been. They scoured the cold, frozen ground, peering into the dry grass and gravel. And it was there, during this desperate, intuitive search, that they found what the professionals had missed. One of the volunteers, inspecting the interior of a towed car they were allowed to inspect, noticed something odd. Under the driver's seat, wedged into the metal skid rails, were grits of something that was completely out of place. It was fine. Almost white river sand and a few tiny, perfectly water-sanded, multicolored glasses. The kind you'd find on old beaches, where the waves had been grinding broken glass for decades. This finding wasn't just strange, it was impossible. The forensic experts to whom the family later gave the samples confirmed their worst fears. The similar composition of the sand and the characteristic shape of the glass beads were completely atypical of Tennessee or Alabama soil. Geological examinations showed that the nearest places where similar soil could be found were hundreds of miles away in completely different regions of the country. This meant one thing. Before the Hyundai Palisade was abandoned on I-40, it had been somewhere else, someplace unknown, next to a river or lake that no one knew about. That handful of sand was the first piece of physical evidence screaming that the official geography of this case was a lie. Ronald Dumas's true route was far more complicated and terrifying than just a straight line down an interstate highway. The sand find was a moment of bitter confirmation for the family. Their intuition, their certainty that the police were not seeing the whole picture, gained physical proof. Shakaria Samples and Talia Berryhill, the mothers of Ronald's children, began to demand active police action with renewed vigor. Their frustration and anger were palpable. In interviews with local channels, they bluntly stated that they were not being taken seriously. They felt that because Ronald was an adult African-American male, the investigation from the beginning leaned toward the easiest and most convenient version. He had simply left, had a fling, decided to disappear. It wasn't a mental breakdown, Shakaria repeated to reporters. He would never do that to his children. The Huntsville Police Department's response, at least publicly, remained restrained. In January of 2025, almost a month after the disappearance, their official stance was voiced with extreme caution. There is no basis or evidence to suggest that Dumas is in danger or has been abducted at this time. They pointed out that repeated inspections of the car showed no signs of struggle or violence. This dissonance between the panic of the family, who had already found impossible evidence, and the cold calm of the officials created an unbearable tension. The family saw a mass of behavioral and now physical evidence of disaster. The police saw the absence of blood and shell casings. It was a classic conflict between two realities: the reality of loved ones who know the person, and the reality of a protocol that requires certain standardized evidence of a crime. Feeling like they weren't being heard, the family took a desperate step. They launched a campaign on GoFundMe to raise money for a private investigator. They wanted to find someone who would look for answers, not reasons to deem the case unpromising. Raising nearly $9,000 and hiring a professional was their response to the system's inaction. They weren't going to wait any longer. The decision to hire a private detective was a point of no return. It was not just an addition to the official investigation, but a tacit acknowledgement of its failure. This step changed the family's tactics. From petitioners, they became active participants, leading their own parallel line of inquiry. And this line would soon intersect with the official one, changing it forever. It was the private investigator, the family later claimed, who did what the police did not do in the early days. He didn't just watch the video from the liquor shop. He began methodically working the entire surrounding area, requesting footage from all the cameras that might have captured the car park or the street. He operated on the presumption that Dumas had been kidnapped, which meant the kidnappers must have had a plan and possibly a surveillance vehicle. He looked for inconsistencies in the illusion of security that the camera at the entrance to the shop had captured. The work of a private investigator has put enormous pressure on the Huntsville Police Department. The family's claims on social media and in the press that the professional they hired was finding evidence that the police could have found if they were looking were battering the department's reputation. And when the detective brought investigators his first report, they had to react. Because what he found wasn't just circumstantial evidence. It was direct evidence of surveillance. Proof that Ronald Dumas was not just a random victim that night, but a pre-selected target. This new information, gained through the family's persistence and the work of one man, was the operational twist that forced the police to finally reclassify the case and throw all available resources at it. The inertia of the investigation was broken. Pressure from the family and the work of a private investigator set the flywheel of the official investigation spinning with renewed vigor. When the Huntsville Police Department investigators received the detectives' findings, they were forced to admit that the original theory of a voluntary disappearance no longer held water. They faced an impasse, and the only way out was a complete re-evaluation of all available evidence. The adaptation phase had begun. Instead of waiting for new evidence, they decided to go after the circumstantial ones, the ones that had previously seemed insignificant to them. The first thing they did was to re-examine the video from the liquor shop from a different angle. But now, they were interested in more than just the main camera footage. They requested data from every possible source within a block radius. ATM cameras, shops, warehouses. It was the painstaking routine work of looking for a needle in a haystack. Hours of blurry, grainy footage of dozens of meaningless cars and passers-by. But it was this methodology, dictated by desperation and new input from the private investigator, that brought results. On the footage from the loading zone camera of the warehouse across the street from the liquor shop, they finally saw what the detective was talking about. The quality was terrible, but the gist was clear. As Ronald Dumas, in the company of two women, was leaving the shop, an unremarkable dark sedan was parked on the opposite side of the street. It wasn't parked. It just stood there, with its parking lights on, as if waiting for someone. As soon as Dumas's Hyundai pulled away from the car park, the sedan slowly, without haste, moved off and followed, keeping its distance. It was a shadow. A professional cold stalking. This fact was the missing link that turned a set of strange circumstances into a slender, sinister picture of a pre-planned crime. The operational tactics of the investigation immediately changed. Now they weren't looking for a missing person. They were looking for a group of professional kidnappers. This improvisation, born out of a deadlock, generated a new chain of evidence. Investigators began working not only on the identities of the women in the video, but on all their acquaintances, all their connections, all their contacts. They pulled up archives, checking similar crimes in neighboring states. The investigation was no longer localized. It began to spread, covering new territories and new, as yet unnamed figures. On the 7th of February, 2025, almost 2 months after the disappearance, the Huntsville Police Department made the official announcement the family had been waiting for. They announced that they had received critical new evidence and would reclassify the case from a missing person investigation to an active abduction investigation. The announcement was a full and unequivocal confirmation of the family's fears, but it also meant that there was less and less hope of finding Ronald alive. The reclassification of the case opened access to resources that were previously out of the question. Federal agencies immediately became involved in the investigation: the FBI and the U.S. Marshals Service. Their jurisdiction across state lines was vital to a case that already covered Alabama and Tennessee, and now, as it turned out, stretched to the borders of Mississippi. The whole investigative posture changed from "where is he?" to "who kidnapped him and where are they?" With the assistance of the FBI, who had access to deeper cellular network data and intelligence, the suspects were linked to a specific area. Analyzing the women's movements and contacts from the video led them to the city of Memphis, Tennessee. That is where the key individuals appeared to reside. This shift in geographic focus was a direct result of identifying suspects rather than simply tracking a phone. And although Ronald's phone had last signaled south of Memphis, the investigation now had specific, credible information that allowed them to narrow the search area. It was a 450-acre area south of Memphis, extending into northern Mississippi, a parcel of land associated with one of the suspects. On the 6th of February, the The day before the kidnapping was officially announced, a massive but unadvertised search operation began. 20 investigators from the Huntsville Police Department, the Memphis Police Department, and the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office were deployed to the scene. They were joined by Southeastern Search Dogs Canine Unit, with the region's best search dogs. The area was combed using drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras. Forensic investigators searched every inch of ground. It was hard, grueling work in the face of uncertainty. Cold February weather, viscous mud, dense thickets. The rescuers set up a temporary camp and worked from dawn to dusk, rotating the shifts. Nights were cold, communications unstable. A constant tension hung in the air. They were looking for a body. Everyone realized it, though no one said it out loud. They were looking for a place where the kidnappers could dispose of Ronald Dumas. The days merged into one endless, monotonous search. Square by square, they scoured the vast territory but found nothing. No signs of struggle, no abandoned things, no freshly dug earth. A void. This emptiness pressed the investigators harder than physical fatigue. They worked to the limit, but the earth, to which all the evidence pointed, was silent. It kept its secret, and this silence was almost palpable, ominous. It seemed they were looking in the wrong place, or worse, looking for something that had never been here. On the third day of the search operation, when physical and nervous exhaustion reached its limit, something happened that finally knocked the ground out from under the feet of even the most experienced investigators. It wasn't an explosion or the discovery of a body. It was something more subtle and therefore more disturbing. Canine units working in the southern part of the search area encountered an anomaly they could not explain. The best bloodhounds, trained to find human remains in all conditions, were behaving strangely. They were confidently picking up the trail from the country road that led deep into the territory. They walked with excitement, indicating that the target was close. But at one and the same point, in a small, unremarkable clearing overgrown with sparse bushes, the same thing happened. The dogs stopped abruptly, whimpered, circled in place, and then, tucking their tails, refused to move on. They looked at their guides with obvious confusion and fear, as if the trail they were so confidently leading had simply vanished into thin air. The cynologist tried other dogs at this spot, from different calculations, but the result was identical. At one particular point in the clearing, Ronald Dumas' trail had broken off. This inexplicable behavior of the dogs became a source of controversy and silent irritation in the camp. Some believed that some chemical spilled on the ground was to blame. Others blamed it on wild animals that had broken the trail, but no one could clearly explain why it was happening with such frightening precision in the same place. This clearing had become a cursed place, a point of irrationality in the middle of a methodical police investigation. That same evening, as investigators at the camp were trying to make sense of what had happened, the long-awaited results of the analysis of the corrupted file extracted from the last signal of Dumas's phone arrived from the FBI lab at Quantico. Technicians had been working for weeks to recover the data, and what they were able to get only added to the absurdity of the whole picture. It was a 1-second audio file. There were no screams, no voices, no gunshots. All that could be heard on it was a steady, monotonous, low-pitched hum, a sound like the operation of a massive industrial ventilation system or a huge refrigeration unit. This inhuman, mechanical sound was the last thing Ronald's phone recorded before going silent forever. Now the investigation had two unsolvable mysteries: a trail that dropped off into nowhere, and a sound from nowhere. The facts didn't add up, and it was harder on the psyche than any physical threat. The psychological impasse of the investigation on the ground forced the task force leadership to shift focus. If the physical world wasn't providing answers, then they needed to return to the digital and human world. The search on the ground was curtailed, and all efforts were thrown into working out the identified suspects. And it was here, during the interrogations and analyses of their communications, that a new, decisive turning point occurred. Investigators traced the connections of the women at the liquor shop to two key individuals: 32-year-old Quintarius White and 27-year-old Kira Clark, both from Memphis. An examination of their backgrounds shocked even seasoned detectives. Just months before Dumas disappeared, in February 2024, they had been charged in another mother and child abduction case where the woman was allegedly forced into the sex trade. These were not amateurs, but experienced violent and dangerous criminals. A new point of leverage emerged when investigators gained access to the correspondence between White and Clark on the night of the kidnapping. The text messages they exchanged revealed the chilling anatomy of the conspiracy. In one message, White informed Clark that their victim, Ronald Dumas, had $7,000 in his bank account. Clark's response was not just an instruction, but an order to torture. From a distance, she directed the process in detail, suggesting that White stretch Dumas and pull his teeth out with pliers to gain access to his phone and banking applications. This correspondence was the irrefutable evidence that had been sorely lacking. It not only revealed the motive, a trivial robbery, albeit committed with inhuman cruelty, but also explained the role of each participant. Clark was the think tank, the remote organizer who ran the operation. White and others were the executors on the ground. The women in the liquor shop, it turned out, were the bait who offered Dumas a 2-for-1 deal. He was lured into a trap. These reports gave the investigation a new objective, not just to find the kidnappers, but to prove the existence of an organized criminal group. The investigation was given a new, powerful impetus. Now they had names, motive, and proof. There was only one question, the most important one, which even these horrifying text messages could not answer. Where was Ronald Dumas's body? February of 2025 brought cold winds and a heavy, oppressive certainty. After the investigation gained access to the text messages between the kidnappers, the hope of finding Ronald Dumas alive had all but faded. The appalling ferocity with which his fate was discussed left no room for illusions. For the Dumas family, the focus of their desperate struggle had shifted. They were no longer looking for salvation for their loved one. They were seeking justice for him and answers for themselves. Their initial plea, "Find him," was replaced by another, more somber one, "Tell us where he is." As police and federal marshals launched a full-scale hunt for the 5 prime suspects that spanned several states, the family began their own campaign, no longer to find, but to draw attention to the case. They realized that without public pressure, the case could drown in paperwork, and the suspects could disappear into the vast country. The reward for information, which started at a modest $2,500, was increased first to $7,500 and then to $10,000. It was a desperate attempt to break through the wall of silence they were sure surrounded the kidnappers. Their efforts became more targeted and strategic. The family announced the placement of billboards in the Memphis, Tennessee area. It was a direct challenge thrown into the heart of enemy territory, for this was the hometown of key suspects. Huge billboards with a picture of a smiling Ronald Dumas, and the amount of the reward were to be stared at by those who might know something. Their friends, their neighbors, their relatives. It was psychological warfare in which the family used the only resource available to them: publicity. They were constantly appearing in the media, giving interviews, holding press conferences, sometimes in conjunction with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Their constant presence in the media field served the dual purpose of generating new leads and keeping law enforcement on its toes. After feeling ignored at the outset, the family took on the role of not only Ronald's defenders, but observers of the investigation itself, not allowing it to disappear from the news headlines. At the same time, the official operation to catch the perpetrators was underway, but its details were kept top secret. For the public and the family, it was an agonizing time of waiting. Days turned into weeks and there was no news. It seemed that the suspects who had shown such calculated cruelty were equally calculated to flee. The hope that their capture would shed light on Ronald's whereabouts melted away with each passing day. The atmosphere grew more and more oppressive. There were too many mysteries and still no answers. The society, which at first actively followed the developments, began to tire. The story risked turning into another unsolved case, another card in the police file. The breakthrough came when it was almost no longer expected. Coordinated action by several law enforcement agencies bore fruit. In a series of raids in Memphis, arrests were made. The first to be taken into custody were the secondary members of the conspiracy, those accused of harboring the main suspects. And then the key targets, Injajandord, Quintarius White, and Kira Clark, also fell into the hands of justice. Their capture was the culmination of a months-long manhunt. The operation to find the criminals was complete, but for the Dumas family, it was only the beginning of a new, most agonizing phase. The trials that would finally reveal the truth about Ronald's fate. The denouement, however, was incomplete and shocking. The courtroom replaced the crime scene as the main arena for disclosure, and what was heard there horrified the public. Most telling was the hearing for Kira Clark, extradited from Tennessee to Alabama. It was there, at an Anaya law hearing deciding whether to deny bail, that prosecutors first publicly announced the details of the conspiracy. The Madison County courtroom listened in sepulchral silence. Prosecutors read the text messages Clark exchanged with White. The $7,000 motive became known. But the most shocking part was her cold-blooded and detailed torture instructions. Suggestions to stretch Dumas and pull his teeth out with pliers to gain access to his phone sounded like a script from a horror film. The court hearings became the only source of information. They were piecing together a picture of what had happened, but each new fragment only added to the family's pain. It became known that two women, Kylisha McKinney and Sabrina Chambers, with whom Dumas was seen in the liquor shop, were allegedly involved in prostitution and had lured him into a trap. 3 of the 5 main suspects, Toure McLaurin, Sabrina Chambers, and Carissa Cash, were still wanted. But even the arrest of think tank Kira Clark and key enforcer Quintarius White did not bring a major answer. Despite all the evidence and detailed allegations made in court, no public statements were made at any of the sessions about the whereabouts or condition of Ronald Dumas Jr. The operation to catch the criminals was completed successfully. The legal machinery of justice had begun its work. But for the family, this was not a denouement. It was a confirmation of their worst fears, served up under a sauce of legal language and procedural rules. They got the official version, but they didn't get closure. Justice for the alleged perpetrators had begun, but justice for the Dumas family remained incomplete. The arrests did not bring relief. They brought only a new, even deeper and more agonizing form of uncertainty. The official version of the Ronald Dumas Jr. disappearance case now sounds simple and scary. It was the story of a brutal, financially motivated kidnapping planned and executed by a network of dangerous criminals. The victim was chosen at random, lured into a trap, kidnapped and allegedly murdered for access to a $7,000 bank account. The prosecutor's office is confident it can prove the guilt of those arrested. For the justice system, the case is nearing its logical conclusion. But if you look beyond the protocols and court reports, it becomes clear. The official version does not explain even half of the oddities that have plagued the case since day one. The question of the handful of river sand and polished glass found in the car remains open. This evidence has never been explained. It points to an unknown location that is not in any report, to an intermediate point on the kidnapper's route that has remained a mystery. What was this place, and why did Ronald's car visit it before it was abandoned on a Tennessee highway? The behavior of the FBI's top search dogs in that very clearing south of Memphis remains unexplained. Why did the trail of professionally trained trackers, capable of finding months-old footprints, break at the same point, as if a person had simply vanished into thin air? Was it the result of a chemical attack on the soil? Or was it really the point where all logic breaks down? The dark sedan that shadowed Dumas's car from the liquor shop remains a mystery. Was it the car of one of the known co-conspirators? Or was there another, unknown player in the case whose role has never been established? And finally, the most important mystery. A phrase uttered by one of the co-conspirators, Dedrick Woodard, during interrogation. "You don't understand. He wasn't who they thought he was." This phrase calls into question the very basis of the official version, the randomness of the choice of the victim. Was this kidnapping a monstrous mistake? Or was there really some hidden side to Ronald Dumas's life that even his closest people didn't know about, and that made him a target? That question remained unanswered. Woodard fell silent and did not say another word. The case of Ronald Dumas Jr. is a prime example of how modern investigations are turning into analyses of digital traces and the courtroom into a primary source of information. But it also shows the limits of these methods. Despite the arrests, despite the recovered text messages and geolocation data, the central question remains. Ronald's body was never found. His children never got the opportunity to say goodbye to their father. And the community never learned what really happened on that cold December evening. A story that began with a simple paradox, a moving phone and a standing car, ended with an even more complex paradox. The perpetrators have been found, but the crime has not been fully solved. And until the ultimate question about Ronald's fate is answered, justice in this story will remain incomplete, and the shadow of doubt will remain on the official version, reminding us that sometimes facts raise more questions than answers. On the 24th of February, 2025, 30-year-old Damien Kent disappeared from a brightly lit gas station in the town of Pagosa Springs, Colorado. But the strangeness of this case lay not in the fact that a man was missing, but in how exactly it was documented. At 2 o'clock in the morning of the 24th of February, 2025, Damien Kent was literally erased from the security camera footage. A 1.5-minute flash masked his disappearance from a busy petrol station. But it was the one that became the key piece of evidence. Evidence that indicated that this was not a missing persons case, but one that he had managed to find shortly before in the San Juan Mountains. This footage became the centerpiece of the investigation, its cold, digital heart. In the sterile silence of the Pagosa Springs Police Department's evidence analysis room, Detective Miles Corbin had been studying those few minutes of video for the past hour. On his desk, a cup of cold coffee wobbled from the system unit fan. Outside the window, another night was thickening, the third since the case had begun, and there was no progress. Corbin ran the file over and over again, trying to get at least some detail. He enlarged the image, bringing it down to a set of shapeless pixels, looked for reflections in the shop windows, tried to read at least one symbol on the license plate of the black sedan. It was all in vain. The quality of the recording was woefully poor. But the biggest obstacle was the anomaly itself. The technicians called it a cascading matrix failure with complete loss of signal. To Corbin, it was just 90 seconds of white noise, cutting out the most important part of the story. At exactly 2 hours, 3 minutes, and 12 seconds past 2 in the night, the recording was cut off by a wall of aggressive ripples. And at 2 hours, 4 minutes, and 42 seconds it was restored, showing the scene already empty. 90 seconds. Enough to make a man get in his car and drive away. Enough to be forced into it. Enough to disappear without a trace. On the table next to the monitor was a file, and its contents didn't fit with what he saw on the screen. The facts of the real world contradicted the digital ghost from the petrol station. Damien Kent was a regular citizen, according to the paperwork. His age at the time of his disappearance was 30 years old. His height ranged from 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 7 inches, roughly equal to 170 centimeters. His weight, according to various estimates, ranged from 120 to 170 pounds. He had brown eyes and dark brown hair, which had been gathered into a ponytail on the day of his disappearance. He had a thick beard and mustache, several scars on his face and neck, and pierced ears. But his main attraction was what was hidden under his clothes. A series of unique, almost provocative tattoos. They were so specific that the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, or CBI, which supported the local department, issued a separate bulletin describing them for distribution to tattoo parlors and law enforcement agencies in neighboring states. On the left thigh was an image described as a zombie Hitler. On the right forearm was an antique skeleton key with a heart. His left forearm was occupied by a skull, and his right shoulder blade was covered by a large scorpion entering his shoulder. These drawings turned his body into a kind of map, which investigators hoped would help identify him in the worst-case scenario. The testimony of friends and family painted a portrait of a quiet, even withdrawn man. According to them, his complete lack of contact was highly uncharacteristic behavior. He was not prone to impulsive behavior or sudden departures. He led a measured life and had no obvious enemies. However, a preliminary analysis of financial transactions by CBI analysts revealed a very different, secret side to his life. In the weeks before his disappearance, Damien Kent spent several $1,000s on specific equipment. The list included a professional caving kit, a winch, several skeins of heavy-duty rope, and 2 late-model digital Geiger counters. These purchases did not fit the image of a quiet, small-town man. They pointed to a secret life that none of his loved ones suspected. A life that may have led him to the Speedway petrol station that night. The investigation split into 2 directions from the start. The first, handled by the local Pagosa Springs police, worked the standard kidnapping theories arising out of a traffic dispute. The second, unclassified one, run by the CBI, was trying to understand what secrets Damien might have been involved in and why he needed radiation measuring devices. That February night was no different from hundreds of others in the Colorado mountains. The air was frosty and clear, and the silence was broken only by the rustling of the wind. The Speedway gas station on the outskirts of Pagosa Springs was an island of fluorescent light in the middle of an ocean of darkness, a standard stop for truckers and those, like Damien and his friend, who were just driving through the city at night. The decision to stop was spontaneous, driven by the desire for a hot cup of coffee. Quiet music was playing in the car. The conversation was about nothing. There was no anxiety, no misgivings. An absolute, complete illusion of safety, woven from routine and habit. Even when the same black sedan pulled into the petrol station, there was no interest. Just another car in the night. The conflict that had erupted between Damien and the unfamiliar driver hadn't seemed out of the ordinary at first either. The witness, a friend of Damien's, later recalled that he did not pay much attention and calmly walked back to his car to wipe the frozen window. He heard fragments of phrases from which he realized that the stranger was accusing Damien of taking something from someplace in the mountains. but it sounded like the kind of late-night argument that comes from fatigue and nerves. He was sure that Damien would be back in a minute, and they would go on their way. That certainty was the last calm moment of his life. When he turned around, the argument was gone. There was no black car, no friend of his, just the cold light of street lamps flooding the empty tarmac. The illusion of safety shattered in an instant. Damien's friend, having finished wiping the glass, turned around and looked at the place where the black sedan had been standing just a minute ago. Empty. His first reaction wasn't surprise, but mild irritation. He assumed Damien had simply gotten into the car with a stranger to continue the conversation somewhere else. He pulled out his phone to call him, but the call was immediately dropped. He strolled across the lit-up forecourt of the petrol station, peeked around the corner of the building, called Damien by name. The response was only silence, broken by the hum of refrigerators from the shop and the rustle of the wind. The minutes dragged on, turning to clammy, cold anxiety. The realization that something wrong had happened did not come all at once, but slowly, in waves. First bewilderment, then anxiety, and finally panic. At 2 hours and 19 minutes past 2 in the morning, he called the 911 service. The first patrol crew arrived on the scene 7 minutes later. The officers listened to the witness's confused account. In their practice, such calls were not uncommon. Night fights, after which one of the participants left to cool down, were commonplace. But the witness's account contained one detail that stood out. He clearly heard the driver of the black car accuse Damien, not of a traffic incident or a monetary debt, but of having taken something from underground in the mountains. This phrase, devoid of specifics, sounded strange and out of place in the context of a domestic dispute at a petrol station. The police recorded the statement but did not give it decisive importance at the time. They combed the surrounding area, interviewed the sleepy cashier who saw and heard nothing, and finding no obvious signs of a struggle, categorized the incident as a human condition check. Damien Kent was not officially reported missing until the morning, when it became clear that he had not returned home and had not been in contact with anyone. The trigger that set off the chain of events had gone off. An ordinary night turned into the beginning of an emergency, and a standard call into a case that would soon baffle not only the local police, but also the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. At first light, an investigative task force arrived at the Speedway petrol station. The cold light of dawn outlined every detail of the scene, stripping it of its nighttime mystique and turning it into a set of potential clues. Criminalists methodically, square by square, began to examine the asphalt, rubbish bins, the roadside. And it was there, a few meters from the road, covered in light dust, that the first significant artifact of the case lay. Damien Kent's mobile phone. The discovery was met with guarded optimism. Often in such cases, a damaged phone could provide a clue, show signs of a struggle, save the last message or call. But this phone was intact. Not a scratch on the screen, not a dent in the case. When it was plugged into the portable charger, the indicator light showed the battery was 87% charged. That was the first contradiction. Why would a man, who may have been kidnapped, leave behind a fully functioning and charged phone? The device was immediately packed up and sent to the CBI's Digital Forensics Lab in Denver. The response from them came a few hours later, and only added to the mystery. The phone was professionally cleaned. This was no ordinary factory reset that any user could do. Analysts found that specialized software had been used that repeatedly overwrote the device's memory with random data, leaving no chance of recovering the contacts, messages, photos, or call history. Someone had made a serious effort to turn Damien's main source of information about his life into a useless piece of plastic and metal. But even the most meticulous cleaning methods sometimes leave traces. In the device's volatile memory, in the cache of the GPS module, one single, last packet of data was saved. A piece of information about the phone's last location before its operating system was wiped. This fragment was the second, far more serious contradiction. The coordinates pointed to a point in the heart of the Rio Grande National Forest, 70 miles southwest of Pagosa Springs. But it wasn't just the distance. The point was in an area of steep rock ledges and impenetrable forest at an elevation of over 10,000 feet, several miles from the nearest road or even a hiking trail. Getting there by car was physically impossible. Getting there on foot in winter, at night, in the short time that had passed since the disappearance, was almost unrealistic. Investigators now had a paradox on their hands. Tangible evidence found in the city pointed to a geographically impossible location in a wild, uninhabited area. The moment when the rescue operation went from standard to mysterious had arrived. When Detective Corbin received the report from the CBI lab, his first reaction was not surprise, but deafening professional irritation. In his years of service, he had become accustomed to the idea that evidence should simplify the investigation, lead the way, narrow the search. This evidence was doing the opposite. It exploded the logic of the case, scattering its shards over hundreds of square miles of mountain range. There was an air of confusion at the emergency meeting at the Pagosa Springs Police Department. On one side of a white marker board was written the address of the Speedway gas station, circled in red. On the other side hung a printed topographical map of the Rio Grande National Forest, with the same red dot in the middle of nothing. It wasn't just distance that separated the two dots, but common sense as well. So what do we have? The police chief, an older and tired man, broke the silence. We've got a missing guy, a wiped phone found here in town that for some reason is signaling from the middle of nowhere. What's the theory? The phone was thrown out of a car on the road? But why there? And how could it signal from a place where there's no mobile phone service? The questions hung in the air. Everyone present realized that standard protocols didn't work here. They had encountered something that didn't fit their experience. Emotions were restrained, but the tension was felt physically. It was not fear of the unknown, but the frustration of professionals faced with a task that seemed to have no right solution. Where to direct the already limited resources? Scour the city for a black sedan, or organize a full-scale search expedition in the mountains based on a single, dubious GPS signal? The witness, a friend of Damien's, was called back for a second interrogation. He was shown a map with a marked point on it. He took a long look at the curves of the terrain, but there was only utter bewilderment in his eyes. He had never been in that area. He had no idea what Damien could be doing there. To him, this information was another blow. His plain and simple world in which his friend had been forcibly taken away from the petrol station was crumbling. Now Damien's fear for his life was joined by a sense of some irrational, incomprehensible mystery that he had unwittingly touched. His testimony, which had been the only support for the investigation, now seemed even stranger in the light of the new data. And the investigators, looking at his bewildered face, could not rid themselves of the unpleasant question: was he telling the whole truth? On the third day of the investigation, it became obvious that the case had reached an operational dead end. It was not a life that had been lost. At least, there was still hope for that. The very logic of the investigation, its linearity and predictability, was lost. A confluence of factors, the anomalous camera footage, the bizarre dispute over a find in the mountains, the erased phone and its impossible geolocation, had forced the leadership of the Pagosa Springs Police Department to admit that the scope of the case was beyond their capabilities. It was the threshold of irreversibility, the moment when it became clear that there was no going back to the standard versions. The chief of police held a private conference call with the CBI Regional Office Management. The result of this conversation was an official decision. The investigation was to be placed under the full control of the Bureau. The local department was to provide full support. The tactics of the search changed dramatically. It was decided to act in two independent but coordinated directions. The first line of inquiry, provisionally named the City, remained in Pagosa Springs. A team of CBI detectives, reinforced by the best analysts, was to focus on the forensic part, finding the black sedan, working out all Damien's possible connections, and most importantly, trying to understand what exactly he could have found in the mountains. The second area, mountains, was a much more complex and ambitious task. It was the basis for a full-fledged search operation in the Rio Grande National Forest. Its purpose was to verify the coordinates received from the phone. The team was made up of experienced searchers, mountain survivalists, and drone operators. They realized that the chances of finding anything in such a vast and wild area were minimal. But this ghostly signal was the only physical clue leading beyond the petrol station. The investigation was finally no longer a missing persons case. It had become a complex two-pronged operation, where the high technology of digital forensics had to work in tandem with the hard physical labor of searchers trudging through the snowy forest. And no one could tell which of these two directions would turn out to be the right one, and which would be the road to nowhere. It's been a week since Damien Kent disappeared. The investigation, split in two directions, had hit a wall. In the mountains, the Mounties team faced a harsh reality. Aerial photography and drone overflights of the area proved almost useless. The dense pine forest and complex rugged terrain hid the land in a dense blanket, making it impossible to see any detail. The GPS signal that had brought them here had been a one-time event. The phone didn't make contact again. The team had been forced to switch from technological reconnaissance to the most archaic and exhausting method, a ground sweep of the area by foot teams. But the territory was so vast and the conditions so difficult that their work was like looking for a needle in an endless haystack. In Pagosa Springs, the city team ran into an equally deafening wall. Dozens of hours of analyzing city and traffic camera footage yielded nothing. The black sedan left the Speedway gas station and vanished into thin air. It wasn't picked up by any other cameras on the city's exits. Detectives re-interviewed everyone who might have seen anything, but got no new leads. The case languished in the absence of evidence. It was slowly cooling off, risking a cold case file. It was at this point, when the standard methods had exhausted themselves, that the investigation took a step to the side. It was an improvisation, born of desperation. In CBI's Denver Analytics Department, a young analyst named Sarah Jenkins suggested an unconventional approach. "We're looking for a needle in a haystack," she told her supervisor. "We're trying to identify the car visually, but we don't have a license plate or any special features. What if we go from the reverse? What if this car was stolen?" The idea was simple but required a tremendous amount of work. Instead of looking for a specific car in the video, Jenkins suggested analyzing all the reported stolen black sedans from across Colorado and neighboring states in the month before Damien's disappearance. It was a huge data set, hundreds of claims, most of which had nothing to do with the case. Management had reluctantly agreed, devoting minimal resources to the job. Sarah Jenkins and her two colleagues plunged into the monotonous, exhausting work of analyzing the databases, unaware that this particular shot at random would eventually hit the target. A new reality had set in. The quick success that everyone had hoped for in the early days was replaced by a hard, exhausting routine. For the mountain team, it meant a daily battle against the elements. Their temporary camp at the foot of the mountain range became a small island of civilization in the middle of the wilderness. Each day began before dawn with hot coffee and a briefing. Then groups of 3 to 4 people would leave on predetermined routes, going deeper into the forest. Their reality consisted of the crunch of snow under their boots, thin mountain air that made breathing difficult, and constant exertion. They explored every ravine, every clearing, every group of rocks. By evening, they would return to camp, dead tired, and mark another checked square on the map. A square in which there was nothing. Overnight stays in cold tents, problems with equipment that didn't work well in the cold, and monotonous meals had become their routine. Hope melted away with each passing day, giving way to the mechanical fulfillment of duty. In the warm and bright offices in Denver and Pagosa Springs, reality was different, but no less exhausting. For the city team, it consisted of endless stacks of papers and gigabytes of digital data. Detective Corbin and his colleagues reread the witness statements time after time, trying to find hidden meanings in them. They checked the alibis of dozens of people who'd ever had a conflict with Damien, even though they realized it was probably a waste of time. Their work had become a methodical elimination of the impossible in the hope that what remained would be the truth. For Sarah Jenkins and her team, reality was a monitor screen of successive police hijacking reports. Dozens, hundreds of reports. A black sedan stolen by teenagers for fun. A black sedan stripped for parts. A black sedan found abandoned 2 days later. They sifted through this information rubbish, and with each passing day, the belief that they could find anything of value faded. It was a war of attrition, where the enemy was not a criminal group, but entropy itself, the chaos of random events in which their cause was drowning. By the end of the 3rd week, the investigation had reached its lowest point. A psychological breakdown was felt in both teams. In the mountains, it was expressed in silent tension. In the evenings, there was almost no conversation around the campfire. People were exhausted not so much physically as morally. The pointlessness of their efforts was becoming obvious. One of the rescuers, a veteran of dozens of search operations, in a private conversation with the team leader said, "We are looking for a ghost. That GPS signal was either a glitch or a trap to distract us. There is no one here. We're just wasting time and resources." These sentiments, albeit unspoken, were shared by many. Guilt was mixed with irritation. We could be helping at this time where there is actually a chance to save someone. In the offices, the breakdown was quiet, but no less devastating. Detective Corbin increasingly found himself looking out the window rather than at the case files. The pressure from his superiors and the press was mounting. The story of the disappearance from the petrol station and the mysterious malfunction on the camera had leaked into the local news, feeding rumors and speculation. Corbin felt like the captain of a ship that had run aground. He'd done everything he could, but there was no shore in sight. Sarah Jenkins was on the verge of declaring her idea a failure. She'd already checked over 200 hijacking reports. Every one of them led to a dead end. Fatigue was leading to mistakes. She began to doubt her own competence. The hardest part was realizing that the facts didn't add up. There were too many contradictions, too many oddities. This was no longer just an investigation, but a confrontation with something irrational, and it pressed harder than any logical task. It was at that moment, when hope had almost run out, that the turning point occurred. It happened late at night when Sarah Jenkins, mechanically reviewing the last files on her list, was about to switch off the computer. She opened another application. It had been filed in La Plata County 2 days before Damien disappeared. Type of vehicle? Black sedan. Standard case. But something made her read it all the way through. The owner of the car, Dr. Alistair Finch, an 82-year-old retired geology professor, had indicated in an additional comment on the statement that another item had gone missing from his house along with the car. He described it as a leather tube containing several antique maps of the mines and shafts of the San Juan Mountains. Sarah reread that sentence several times. The San Juan Mountains. The mines. Mines. She felt a chill run down her spine. She immediately opened the report with the testimony of the witness, Damien's friend. Again, she found that very phrase. He demanded the return of what Damien had taken from beneath the earth. 2 fragments of the mosaic, found 3 weeks apart and hundreds of miles apart, matched perfectly. It was a new fulcrum. Fragile, but real. She immediately called Detective Corbin on the secure line. For the first time in a long time, Corbin's voice was animated. The deadlocked investigation had gained a new, completely unexpected impetus. They had a connection. The carjacking was no longer a random event. It was directly connected to the geology, to the history of these places. And most importantly, they had a new name, Dr. Alistair Finch. A man who may not have even realized that his old maps were the key to solving the mystery of Damien Kent's disappearance. An investigation that had almost gone into the archives had become alive again. Now they had a new goal, not just to find the missing man, but to understand what secret was hidden on those old maps and why they were willing to go to kidnapping for it. The new lead, which seemed destined to be a clue, in practice only added a new layer of historical mystery to the case without providing any concrete answers. Detective Corbin and the CBI special agent in charge of coordinating with the Bureau paid a visit to Dr. Alistair Finch. His house on the outskirts of Durango was more of a museum than a dwelling. The air inside was thick with the smell of old paper, dust and ozone from running copy machines. The rooms were littered with racks of mineral specimens, each neatly labeled. Ancient books on geology and dusty boxes of documentation. The professor himself, tall and gaunt as a herbarium, greeted them with polite, detached curiosity. His memory, like his house, was filled with details of the distant past, but struggled to hold the present. He confirmed the missing maps. Laying out similar copies on the large table, he explained their value. They were not mere charts, but unique documents drawn up by the first miners in the 19th century with handwritten notes and comments. They marked not only the official veins, but also test pits, collapses, and most importantly, geological anomalies. When asked which of the mines might be of particular interest, he thought for a long time, going over hundreds of names in his mind. He told of dozens of places, but then settled on one, the Silent Annie mine. According to him, it was a bad place, steeped in legend. It was officially closed in the early 20th century because the ore vein was exhausted. But there were rumors among the old miners about the bad air that caused people to feel dizzy, nauseous, and vivid hallucinations. Some claimed to hear a strange, low rumbling sound deep in the mine. Finch, as a scientist, surmised that these were natural gas outcrops, possibly laced with hydrogen sulfide, but admitted that no precise geological explanation for the phenomenon had ever been found. No serious research had ever been done there. This information gave the mountain's search team a new, but very vague and disturbing target. The mountain team had to spend another fortnight searching for and surveying several abandoned mines in the area the professor had indicated. The work was fraught with great risk. The entrances to the mines had long ago collapsed, and the sappers had to clear the rubble. Inside, there was perpetual cold and darkness. The air was stifling, heavy. The rescuers, laden with gas detectors and oxygen tanks, slowly made their way down the dilapidated, half-flooded tunnels. They surveyed Quiet Annie and 3 other neighboring mines, but all their efforts were in vain. They found no trace of Damien, no sign of recent human occupancy, nor did they hear any abnormal rumbling. As spring came, the snow in the San Juan Mountains began to melt, exposing the ground, but no new evidence. Time was running out. The media finally lost interest in the story, switching to more recent incidents. Damien's family, exhausted by the wait, had stopped believing in a happy outcome and now only wanted some certainty. By the late spring of 2025, after nearly 3 months of fruitless searching, the operation was officially called off. The mountain team was disbanded. Damien Kent's case was not closed, but he was transferred to the unsolved crimes unit. It became a cold case. The hope that he would ever be found was all but extinguished. A few more months passed. Summer had turned to autumn. In Detective Corbin's office, Damien Kent's case files lay on the corner of his desk, ready to be filed away. For Corbin, it was a personal defeat, a thorn in his professional pride. He went over the details over and over in his head, looking for a mistake, a missed opportunity. Packing the documents into the archive box, he looked over the financial analyst's report one last time, just to make sure all the paperwork had been done correctly. His eye caught on a line he hadn't given much thought to before. A payment of several $100s to Rockspec, a private geological exploration lab in Denver, made the week before he disappeared. It was a routine action, the final touch before filing the case. Just to make sure every rock was turned over, Corbin decided to make one final call, not expecting anything new. In the laboratory, his call at first caused bewilderment. The case was old, but after checking the archives by transaction number, a female employee confirmed that they had indeed analyzed a sample for a client named Damien Kent. The results had been ready a long time ago and sent to his personal email, which the investigation had no access to. Using a formal request from the CBI, Corbin asked for a copy of the report to be sent to his secure address. An hour later, a new file appeared on his computer. Opening it, the detective expected to see a standardized report that could simply be attached to the case file. What he didn't realize was that this document would be the final, most shocking act of the whole story. It was a standard report on the spectrographic analysis of a mineral sample. The first pages contained nothing unusual. Quartz, pyrite, traces of silver and zinc. Standard composition for ore from the San Juan region. But the last section of the report was marked with a few asterisks, and a lengthy commentary from the head lab technician. It said that the analysis revealed a microscopic trace of an element that could not be identified. It was an isotope with an atomic mass not corresponding to any known element in the periodic table. The report dryly and dispassionately described its anomalous properties. The element emitted a low but constant and highly unusual type of ionizing radiation that was unlike either alpha, beta, or gamma decay. The note stated, the type of decay does not fit known models. Further study is required. In addition, the element had an abnormally high light absorption coefficient, which, according to calculations, should appear completely black in its pure form, not reflecting the rays of the visible spectrum. The lab technician wrote in his conclusion that it was most likely an equipment error or previously unknown contamination of the sample, but strongly recommended additional research using a higher resolution mass spectrometer. At this point, all the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Geiger counters, secret expeditions into the old mine, the stranger's desperate desire to get back what Damien had taken from underground. This wasn't a kidnapping for ransom. It was a hunt for an artifact. The lab report was the denouement of the operation, but not the solution to the mystery. It answered the question, why? But it didn't answer the big questions. Who? And what happened next? This evidence was both a shocking breakthrough and a final dead end. It explained the motive, but left no trace leading to the perpetrators or to Damien himself. In a closed-door meeting in Denver, the CBI leadership made a decision. The lab report was removed from the general case file and classified under a special protocol related to potential national-level threats. The official version, released to the press and to the Pagosa Springs Department, was that the investigation had stalled for lack of new evidence. And that was true. Damien Kent was never found. The black sedan stolen from the geology professor disappeared without a trace. The identity of the driver Damien spoke to in his last known moments remained unidentified. We are left with a series of questions that may never be answered. What was the anomalous isotope Damien had found in the dark heart of the old Silent Annie mine? Was it just a unique geological anomaly? Or was it something more, something out of this world? And was that 90-second flash of digital chaos that erased his disappearance from the film a simple technical malfunction? Or was it an echo of a force that defies the laws we know and should never have been disturbed? Damien Kent's story was a quiet but disturbing reminder that beneath the familiar world sometimes lurks secrets far older and darker than we can imagine. In August 2025, 28-year-old Matthew Spencer and his silver Hyundai Tucson disappeared without a trace from one of America's busiest motorways. What was surprising was not the disappearance itself, but the fact that thanks to recent searches from his smartphone, rescuers knew the exact location of the disappearance to within a few dozen meters. But that was only the beginning, for the real mystery lay in the digital footprints he left behind. Footprints that pointed not to a tragic accident, but to a chain of events as inexplicable as they were frightening. The air in the Kaibab National Forest in northern Arizona was thick and still, like frozen amber. At 7,000 feet above sea level, the midday sun, relentless and white, struggled to break through the dense canopy of the crowns of centuries-old ponderosa pines, painting a shivering, deceptive mosaic of light and shadow on the needle-strewn ground. In this deafening silence, where even the rustling of the wind in the tall needles seemed like an event, any sound brought in from outside was out of place, almost sacrilegious, especially the sound of slowly approaching, measured footsteps and the short, dry crackle of encrypted radio communication. The search team from the Coconino County Sheriff's Office moved through the woods tactically, almost silently, like a pack of predators on the trail. These men, hardened professionals and dedicated volunteers, are used to places like this. Their jurisdiction, one of the largest in the country, has encompassed ruthless deserts, vertiginous canyons, and endless forests, places where nature takes what never belonged to her with cold ease. But today, there was a different kind of tension in their fine-tuned movements and concentrated faces. They weren't looking for a lost hiker in a brightly colored jacket or the victim of an obvious accident. They were following a digital trail, the cold, ghostly echo of a smartphone signal that had brought them here, to a completely unremarkable piece of land, just a half-mile from the humming ribbon of the I-40 interstate. Their initial assumptions were prosaic and based on hundreds of similar calls. Everyone expected to see the same thing, a silver Hyundai Tucson, perhaps driven clumsily into a ditch, with broken windows, an empty gas tank, or signs of botched repairs. The reality they faced was far more disturbing in its chilling simplicity. At the foot of an old, gigantic pine tree, whose bark resembled the deeply wrinkled skin of an ancient lizard, there was a rucksack. It had not been abandoned in a hurry, nor was it lying in the dust among the bumps and dry branches. It was neatly placed on a soft bed of dry needles, zipped up, as if its owner had stepped away for a moment to admire the view and was about to return for his luggage. The team leader, Lieutenant John Hargrove, a man whose weathered face was as blown out and reliable a map of the area as the ones in his official SUV, stopped a few paces away, raising a hand to stop the others. He'd seen many things in his 20-plus years of service. Desperate signs of the fight for life scratched into the rocks. Camps abandoned in panicked terror, bodies mutilated beyond recognition by the elements. But this picture was different. It was quiet, frighteningly orderly, and utterly, fundamentally illogical. A lone, perfectly placed rucksack in the heart of a vast, wild forest. The scene didn't scream of tragedy playing out. It barely whispered of an unsolvable mystery. The context of this strange, almost surreal discovery began to take shape two long weeks before the heavy boots of the rescuers touched the ground. The story of Matthew Spencer, a 28-year-old software engineer from Washington State, was not that of a reckless adventurer. He wasn't climbing peaks, rafting rivers, or exploring the wilderness. He was on his way to a new, carefully planned life. His long journey took him from Las Vegas, a city of neon lights and unfulfilled hopes that he could never love, to Houston, Texas, where a prestigious job with a technology company and a new, spacious home awaited him. For his family, especially for Kara, his twin sister, with whom he shared an almost mystical telepathic bond, it was a welcome, joyous event, the end of a period of uncertainty for Matthew. He was an experienced, methodical driver, accustomed to long, monotonous drives along the vast American highways. He was always on the phone, his messages predictable and regular as clockwork, past Oklahoma City, stopped for petrol in Amarillo. So when his family received a text message from him on the evening of the 5th of August, it caused not alarm, but mild bewilderment. Matthew wrote that he was passing through Cloudcroft, New Mexico. Kara, who knew his route well and had been following him on the map, frowned in surprise. The mountain village of Cloudcroft was hundreds of miles east of where he should logically be at this time, but she put it down to simple fatigue, to a possible mistake in the name of some small, similar-sounding town. The real cold alarm came later, when the next day, the 6th of August, after a brief and, as it seemed to her at the time, perfectly normal phone conversation, Matthew went silent. At first, his phone just rang, beep after beep, with no answer. By late afternoon, it began to go straight to voicemail. Kara knew her brother. He wasn't the type to go missing. She sprang into action, and this is where the quiet family anxiety collided with a cold, impenetrable wall of bureaucracy and jurisdictional confusion. A report was filed with the New Mexico State Police, based on the last known information. Local officers politely accepted it, but without a body or wrecked car, the case was not given high priority. They began a standard check, but found no trace of Matthew himself or his silver Hyundai Tucson. Precious, critical days were gone, dissolving into inaction. While a desperate Kara pounded the pavement, insisting that something was wrong, that her brother would never do such a thing, Matthew's digital ghost remained invisible to officials. It wasn't until nearly 2 weeks later, when the case finally caught the attention of Arizona investigators, thanks to the family's persistence, that a formal request was made to the tech giants. The response came almost instantly and was overwhelming. An automatic license plate reader camera, a system that impartially records the flow of traffic, captured Matthew's car on the 5th of August, not in New Mexico, but in Flagstaff, Arizona. His Google account data confirmed this with killer accuracy. The last searches made on the 6th and 7th of August came from his device, which was here, in this very square of the Kaibab National Forest. The gap between the reality recorded by technology and the message sent by the man was colossal, over 500 miles. The 2-week search was not just in another state. It was in a completely different reality, while the true place of disappearance kept its sinister secret in complete, unspoiled silence. Every tragedy, as we know, begins at the moment when the familiar, predictable course of things gives a barely perceptible crack. For Matthew Spencer, that fateful crack appeared on the perfectly smooth, sun-drenched asphalt of Interstate 140. His last conversation with his sister on the 6th of August had been the epitome of routine, the kind of routine that you only realize the value of when it's irretrievably gone. He talked about the road, complained about the bad coffee at the gas station, talked about the music he was listening to, and shared his plans for his first work week in Houston. There wasn't the slightest shadow of worry or foreboding in his voice. The weather, according to archived data from the National Meteorological Services, was ideal for a long trip. Cloudless skies, a light westerly wind, and a temperature in the neighborhood of a comfortable 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The road he was on was not an abandoned country lane from a horror film. It was one of the main thoroughfares of the United States, a steady, pulsing stream of multi-ton trucks and cars, a river of steel connecting the west and east coasts. His 2006-year-old Hyundai Tucson, although not new, was an island of reliability. It had been fully serviced before the trip and was equipped with everything he needed. In its cabin, crammed with boxes of belongings, was his entire past life, ready to be moved into the future. Everything, absolutely everything, indicated that this was going to be another long, slightly tiring, but perfectly safe day on the road. The scenery outside the window changed slowly, hypnotically. Sun-scorched plains smoothly gave way to hills covered with stunted junipers. And then the road began to climb steadily higher into the coolness and shade of the pine forest. It is a world of majestic, almost primal tranquility, where the horizon seems endless and civilization reminds of itself only by a perfect ribbon of asphalt and rare, lonely roadside cafes. In this illusion of complete control and absolute security, in this lulling atmosphere of predictability, a catastrophe was about to happen. Not loud, not explosive, but quiet, internal and unnoticeable to the passing world. A catastrophe that probably began with a simple, treacherous click under the bonnet, and ended with the complete and utter, inexplicable disappearance of a man and his car from the face of the earth. The narrative of any disaster is, in essence, a reconstruction of the very moment when the world turns off the rails and hurtles into the unknown. In Matthew Spencer's case, that moment was not marked by an explosion or a cry for help. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, and completely mechanical. This trigger, which set off a chain of inexplicable events, was reconstructed by investigators later, thanks to cold, dispassionate analyses of digital data, but its atmosphere still felt almost physically. Imagine the interior of a car filled with the smell of dust, cardboard, and faint car freshener. Outside the window, the last rays of the August sun are coloring the tops of the pine trees in copper and purple tones. The engine of the Hyundai Tucson is running smoothly, its monotonous humming the only soundtrack to the slowly changing landscape. And then, in this lulling routine, something insignificant happens. The dashboard dims for a moment and the tachometer arrow twitches as if from a convulsion. Matthew probably doesn't even pay attention to it. But that was the first symptom. The real turning point came as dusk fell. Matthew pulled over to the side of the road, perhaps to stretch his legs or to check the navigator. He switched off the engine, and the silence of the forest instantly drifted into the cabin, bringing with it the coolness and smell of pine needles. When he turned the ignition key again, nothing happened. No roar of the starter, no familiar vibration. Only a single, dry, almost contemptuous click from somewhere under the bonnet, followed by complete, dead silence. He tried again, and again. The result was the same. A single click. At that very moment, Matthew Spencer ceased to be a traveler. He became a man in need. It was then that he turned to the only 21st century oracle he had at hand, his smartphone. His first search query was a model of pragmatism and logic. Why won't my Hyundai Tucson of 2006 year start and click? The internet obligingly gave him dozens of possible causes. Dead battery, faulty starter, alternator problems. It was a common, annoying, but solvable problem. But his next inquiry, made a few minutes later, was no longer about mechanics. It was a cry for help in the form of a numeric question. Where am I? In that simple query lay the essence of his tragedy. He faced not one, but two failures at once. His car refused to serve him in the physical world, and his own sense of direction betrayed him in the mental world. An ordinary breakdown on the side of a busy motorway has turned into the existential crisis of a lost man trapped in a metal box in the middle of a vast, indifferent forest. The action returns to the present, to the search party standing by a lone rucksack. Lieutenant Hargrove, after a long, tense pause, gives the signal. Two team members, clad in latex gloves, cautiously as if handling an explosive device, approach the find. Every step, every movement is documented on camera. In these cases, the original scene is sacred ground. Any mistake, any overlooked footprint can bury the truth forever under a layer of conjecture. The first rescuer slowly unzips the main compartment of his rucksack. The air fills with the faint smell of fabric, road dust, and something subtly personal. The contents of the rucksack were as disturbingly normal as its location. A change of clothes, neatly folded. A laptop in a protective case. Chargers. Nothing to indicate panic or struggle. In a side pocket, they find a wallet. Inside is a driver's license in the name of Matthew Spencer, several credit cards, and about $300 in cash, untouched. The version of a simple robbery, the simplest and most straightforward, crumbles to dust. Next to the wallet are keys. Not to a car, but to his old flat in Las Vegas, and presumably to his new home in Houston. Keys to the past and the future, found at a point of absolute uncertainty. But the main find, the one that turned this case from strange to downright anomalous, was waiting for them at the very bottom. It was an ordinary, worn tourist map of the states of Arizona and New Mexico. On it, in the eastern part, the very town of Cloudcroft was circled in bold red marker. It was tangible evidence of the very text message that had sent the initial search on a false trail. But that's not what struck Hargrove and his team. A straight, hard, almost aggressive line was drawn from the circled town, crossing the state line and ending deep in the Kaibab National Forest. The terminus of this line, marked with a bold cross, was only a few miles from where they now stood. There was nothing on the map at this location. No roads, no trails, no settlements. Just tightly spaced, curved lines marking the complex mountainous terrain. There was silence in the forest, broken only by the crackle of the radio and the distant rumble of trucks on the highway. Lieutenant Hargrove held the map in his hands, his gloved fingers carefully smoothing the folds. He stared at it for a long moment, unblinking. His face, which usually expressed only professional concentration, had become an impenetrable mask. He didn't say a word, but every rescuer on his team, who had known their commander for years, saw something change in his eyes. The comfortable, logical scenarios, lost, broken, robbery, evaporated before his eyes, leaving behind a cold, ringing emptiness. The map in his hands was not just evidence. It was a manifesto, evidence of an irrational, incomprehensible intent. Matthew wasn't just lost. He was purposefully driving or wanting to get to a point that didn't exist on civilization's maps, following a route laid out from a place he wasn't physically in. This realization spread slowly through the group like the chill of the night. The forest around them, which only an hour ago had just been a difficult area to find, now seemed different. It was as if it were watching them, keeping in its shadow not just a tragedy, but a mystery built on absurdity, Hargrove finally raised his head and looked round at his team. Then he brought the radio to his mouth. His voice was steady when he came on the air, but it didn't have the same old rescuer's confidence. It was the voice of an investigator who had just peered into the abyss. "Base, this is Hargrove. We've got something unusual here. We need forensics, a full complement, and secure a perimeter within a 2-mile radius. Nobody gets in. I repeat, no one." At that moment, everyone realized that the standard operation was over. Something completely different had begun. 3 days passed. 3 long, grueling days, during which dozens of people and vehicles combed the forest square by square. The original search zone around the found rucksack was expanded. Cynologists and dogs traveled dozens of miles, but Matthew's trail ended at the same tree, as if he had simply vanished into thin air. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras circled over the forest, but the dense pine canopy was almost impenetrable. The search had reached a dead end. The hope of finding Matthew alive was fading by the hour, but the absence of any further trace of him, not a scrap of clothing, not a boot print, was almost as agonizing as his disappearance itself. The turning point that finally turned this case into one of the strangest mysteries in Arizona history occurred on the 4th day. A 3-man ground team was methodically checking a remote rocky ridge that was considered an unlikely route for a lost man, but had to be checked by protocol. The place was difficult to access, dotted with sharp volcanic rocks and thorny shrubbery. It was there, on a flat, sun-heated boulder, that one of the rescuers noticed something out of place. It was an object made of plastic and glass, reflecting the sunlight. As they came closer, they froze. A single car headlight was lying on the stone, as if it were on display. It was intact, without a single crack. The expert from the team recognized it immediately. It was a headlight from a Hyundai Tucson, the same model Matthew had. But that wasn't what was most shocking. There were no signs of impact or crash damage on the headlight housing. The mounting bolts had been carefully removed. Someone with the right tools and time had methodically removed it from the car. This find, made several miles from the original point, was an absolute cold nonsense. Why would someone disassemble a missing person's car in the middle of the woods and leave the parts in plain sight? This wasn't the act of a panicked criminal trying to hide evidence. It was like a ritual, a message no one could decipher. The moment news of this discovery reached headquarters by radio, Matthew Spencer's case was no longer just a missing persons case. It moved into the category of those rare, dark cases that poison for decades, because they are based not on a tragic accident, but on a cold, inscrutable human will. The search operation was officially reclassified as a major crime investigation. The FBI office in Phoenix was notified. Now they weren't just looking for a missing person. Finding a neatly removed headlamp on a lonely ridge acted on the investigation like a defibrillator discharge. Yeah, it didn't just revitalize him. It fundamentally changed his nature. The next morning, with the cold blue of dawn still hanging over the Kaibab forest, an impressive convoy of dark SUVs with federal license plates arrived on the scene. Bringing in the FBI was not just a formality. It meant a complete change in tactics, resources, and most importantly, search philosophy. The woods were no longer just a place where a person was lost. Now it was a potential crime scene stretching over hundreds of square miles, and every square inch of that land could hide a crucial clue. The first order of business was for the Phoenix agents and forensics team, working in tandem with Lieutenant Hargrove's team, to deploy a mobile command post, a complex set of tents and trailers filled with equipment rarely seen in a typical sheriff's office. The scouring tactic, effective for finding a person, was replaced by a forensic site survey. The search area was divided into new, smaller squares, and each team now included not only experienced trackers, but forensic experts as well. Their task was not to look for Matthew Spencer, but for anomalies tire tracks that didn't match local logging trucks, oil stains, fragments of fabric or plastic, areas of land with freshly disturbed soil. Improvisation became the key to further action. Standard methods had been exhausted, and now the team was forced to think like the criminals they were looking for. Where would you hide a 2-ton vehicle in these woods so it would never be found? This question was heard at every morning briefing. The teams began to deliberately check the most illogical and inaccessible places. Abandoned mining drifts, thick, almost impenetrable juniper thickets, the bottoms of deep ravines and small, overgrown reed ponds scattered throughout the forest. We used metal detectors and even GPR provided by the Geological Service, a device capable of seeing large metal objects underground. Every day turned into hard, methodical work to uncover the secrets that the Earth did not want to give up. As time passed, the investigation fell into an exhausting, almost meditative routine. The days became indistinguishable from each other, merging into a single, endless cycle of hope and disappointment. Dawn, a short briefing at the map, on which there were more and more marks and fewer white spots. Then hours of hiking across rugged terrain, monotonous sweeps of metal detectors, intense scrutiny of every bush, every rock. In the evening, return to the camp, analyzing the collected samples, which again and again turned out to be just rubbish left by tourists, and a short, anxious sleep to the sounds of the night forest. The forest itself was transformed from a mere site of action into the main antagonist. It was huge, indifferent, and full of deceptive shadows. Its silence was crushing, and rare sounds, the crack of a branch under the foot of an invisible animal, the distant cry of a jay, made even the most experienced agents flinch. The life of rescuers and investigators became Spartan. Cold nights intense, instant coffee, which no longer invigorated, but only warmed frozen hands, a constant struggle with fatigue and equipment that failed at the most inopportune moments. Tension hung in the air, thick and palpable, like resin on pine bark. There was an unspoken standoff between the locals on Hargrove's team and the FBI agents. The sheriff's men knew the forest like the back of their hands. They could feel it, read it for subtle signs. The agents relied on technology, protocols, and cold data analysis. They worked efficiently, but the forest defied their logic. It proved again and again that its secrets were deeper than any GPR signal could penetrate. This new reality was a marathon of survival, where the main enemy was not only what had happened to Matthew Spencer, but the very infinity of this green, silent ocean that seemed capable of swallowing anything without a trace. The psychological break came not as a result of a loud argument or an emotional breakdown. It came quietly, on soft paws, led by the most loyal and honest member of the search team. On the 5th day of the protracted investigation, one of the search dogs, a German shepherd named Thunder, working with a sheriff's team dog handler, suddenly veered off course. She was confidently pulling the leash towards a dense, overgrown shrubby area that had already been superficially inspected. The dog handler, trusting his partner's instincts, followed her. The dog led him, not to the tracks or the scent of a man, but to an old, mighty oak tree that looked like a gray-haired forest patriarch. There it stopped, but did not begin to bark as it usually did when detected. Instead, Thunder whined, tucked her tail, and began to stalk away, looking back at her owner fearfully. The kinologist, a seasoned professional who had seen his dogs in many different situations, was amazed. It was not just interest or detection, it was a primal, inexplicable fear. Overcoming the dog's resistance, he approached the tree and began to examine it. In the trunk, at the height of a man's height, was an old, mossy hollow. Looking inside, he fumbled with his hand for something cold and rectangular. It was a smartphone. The discovery caused a storm of restrained excitement in the camp. Matthew Spencer's phone. It was a breakthrough, perhaps the key to the whole mystery. The device was immediately bagged as evidence and handed over to FBI technicians. In their trailer, in sterile silence, plugged into a charger and special equipment to extract data, the phone came to life. The forensics team began a methodical check. The call log was empty. No incoming or outgoing since the last conversation with his sister. The messages didn't contain anything suspicious either. It seemed like the discovery was just another dead end. But then one of the technicians opened the gallery, and everyone in the trailer went silent. The gallery contained several dozen files created the night Matthew disappeared. The first picture was taken about an hour after his last search. The next one was taken a minute later, and so on, with perfect, almost machine-like precision. But there was nothing in the pictures. Each picture was absolutely, perfectly black. These were not photographs with the lens closed. Forensics showed that the camera was working, but had been taken in the total absence of light. Dozens of blank, silent black frames. This discovery was scarier than any picture of violence. It was evidence of something incomprehensible. What was Matthew filming in this impenetrable darkness? Or was he not? This gallery of digital emptiness was a powerful psychological blow to the investigation. It gave no answers, but raised hundreds of chilling questions, turning the case from a criminal mystery into a dark, almost metaphysical parable. The discovery of the gallery of black photographs was the point, after which the investigation went downhill, but for entirely new reasons. It wasn't about running out of evidence or resources. It was that the very nature of the mystery went beyond the standard FBI protocols and the expertise of the sheriff's team. Rational explanations, such as a technical glitch in the camera, were offered and considered, but they couldn't drown out the unsettling, irrational feeling this discovery left. It was as if they were confronted not with human intent, but with something that defied their logic. The enthusiasm in the camp was replaced by a quiet, somber concentration. The men continued to do their work, but there was doubt in their eyes. They scoured the forest, but now they were looking not just for clues, but for confirmation that the world still obeyed the laws of physics and common sense. But the forest was silent. The official search began to wind down. There was no stop order, but the intensity had noticeably decreased. Teams became smaller, detour zones more formal. Everyone realized that without a new, concrete lead, they were just going round in circles in a vast, silent forest that held a secret they might not be able to understand. It was in this moment of fading official operation that an internal fracture occurred. But it occurred not at the headquarters of the investigation, but in the heart of one person, Kara Spencer. Refusing to accept the accident version, and not satisfied with the lack of progress in the official investigation, she made a decision. If the system can't give her an answer, she'll find someone who works outside the system. This determination, born out of desperation and sisterly love, became the new fulcrum for the entire story. As the FBI folded its tents and the sheriff's team returned to routine business, a new phase of the investigation was brewing in the shadows. Private, unofficial, and far more dangerous. Kara began searching for someone who wouldn't be afraid to look into the darkness captured in those black photos. And that decision was about to lead to the final, most shocking revelation in her brother's case. Time is the most ruthless solvent. It blurs the features of faces and photographs, mutes the most poignant memories, and slowly but inexorably turns tragedy into statistics. By the early winter of 2025, the active phase of the investigation into Matthew Spencer's disappearance had effectively ceased. The mobile command post was folded up. Federal agents returned to their offices in Phoenix, and the case, given cold case status, lay thickly filed on a shelf in the archives of the Coconino County Sheriff's Office. For the justice system, the story is over. But for Kara Spencer, it was just beginning. Every day for her was a struggle with silence. Silence from the telephone receiver where her brother's voice once sounded. Silence from the officials who answered her calls with polite but empty phrases. No news. We are doing everything we can. And the worst silence of all, the silence that settled in her own heart, where there used to be an unbreakable bond with her twin. The hope of finding Matthew alive had faded, replaced by a desperate, almost animalistic need for answers. Again and again, she ran her mind over the absurd array of evidence: the rucksack, the map with the line to nowhere, the removed headlight, the gallery of black photographs. They were pieces of a puzzle no one wanted or could put together. It is at this point, at the very bottom of despair, that the strongest resolve is born. Kara realized that a system built on logic and protocols was powerless in the face of the irrational. She sold her car, took out a second mortgage on her house, and did what people do when the law stops helping them. She found a man who specialized in finding answers where none seemed to exist. His name was Julian Croft. He wasn't an ex-cop or a brutal private investigator from slapstick novels. Croft was a former NSA analyst, a thin, pale man with eyes that seemed to see not people, but the streams of data behind their words. He took dearly and worked only cases he deemed interesting. He found the Matthew Spencer case, with its anomalous digital footprints, fascinating. Croft didn't start his work by traveling to Arizona. He locked himself in his San Francisco office, surrounded by a dozen monitors, and immersed himself in the only place he thought he could still find the truth: Matthew's digital echo. He hadn't just studied the FBI reports. Through his old connections, he'd accessed the raw, unprocessed data from the cell towers for that very night. For hours, 24 hours, he sifted through terabytes of information until he found what he was looking for. The jump signal, which the FBI considered an unexplained anomaly, Croft saw differently. It wasn't a jump, it was an echo, a reflection caused by a powerful, narrowly focused electromagnetic pulse. Someone, he said, hadn't just jammed the signal in the area. Someone had, for a brief moment, hit the airwaves with something so strong that it made the nearby towers go crazy. And that hit came from the north, from the direction of an old, abandoned military training ground. This lead was elusive, but it was the only one. While Croft was trying to get some information through his contacts about what might have been going on at the range, the denouement came from a completely unexpected direction. In March of 2026, the state police, as a result of a long development, arrested a large gang of car thieves who had been operating on I-40. During the interrogation of one of the gang members, a minor in the hierarchy, the investigator, just checking information, mentioned the case of a guy who had disappeared a year ago in a silver Hyundai. The gangster's reaction was strange. He turned visibly pale and flatly refused to talk. Only after being promised the softest deal possible did he speak, looking round as if he was afraid of invisible ears. His story was not a confession. It was a whisper, full of superstitious dread. He said their gang had never worked the stretch of woods north of Flagstaff. It was a no-go zone. A different group operated there, he said. He didn't know who they were. Ex-military, mercenaries. He didn't know. But they were feared by everyone in the underworld. He called them the cleaners. They didn't just steal cars. They took everything. The car, the driver, all his stuff. And there was nothing left behind. Absolutely nothing. He mentioned that they were rumored to have some equipment that burns everything, even the air. When the investigator pressed for details, the thug only shook his head and muttered that they'd find it anywhere, even in a cell. This information, which in itself was not direct evidence, in the light of Croft's discoveries, formed a monstrous but logical picture. Officially, Matthew Spencer's case is still unsolved. He is one of thousands of faces on missing persons posters, another digital ghost lost in the vast expanse of the American West. The official version was never formulated, leaving behind only a vacuum filled with his family's pain. But the unofficial version, gleaned from Julian Croft's data analysis and the bandits' frightened whispers, sounds like the script to the darkest techno-thriller. Matthew Spencer didn't just break down in an unfortunate place. His breakdown may not have been an accident. He may have been the victim of a remote, electronic influence that disabled his car's electrical system. He was trapped in a trap set by unseen hunters. His desperate searches were the last trace of his existence in the digital world before he was wiped out. The cleaners, whoever they were, a private military company testing new equipment, or a secret government unit, had removed a witness to their activities. They took him, his car, and all his belongings, leaving not a drop of oil, not a tire print. They erased him from the physical world as effectively as their technology erased him from the digital world. What did the strange clues mean? A map with a line leading nowhere? Perhaps it was Matthew's last, desperate attempt to fix the direction he was being taken. The removed headlight left on the ridge. An ominous signature, a trophy, or just a part that fell out in transit. And the gallery of black photos? That was probably what his camera's sensor saw when the cleaner's powerful electromagnetic equipment was operating nearby. Absolute, impenetrable digital darkness. Matthew Spencer's story leaves behind one, the most important and most frightening question. If there is a technology that can wipe a person off the face of the earth without a trace, and if there are people willing to use it, how many more of these cleaners are working on the desert roads of America? How many more digital ghosts roam the web, leaving behind only unsolvable mysteries and families doomed to wait forever? The investigation into one man's disappearance is over, but it has opened the door to a world where technology breeds monsters, and justice is powerless in the face of absolute, methodical, and ruthless efficiency. And that door remained open. The slope at Stony Fork Creek in the North Carolina mountains is a place where pristine beauty borders on deadly danger. This is not a hiking trail. It's a nearly vertical wall of rock, dirt, and slippery roots hidden under the dense canopy of the Pisgah National Forest. The terrain here is so steep and rocky that even experienced searchers accustomed to mountainous conditions get injured trying to stay on their feet among the slippery foliage and scree. The air here is dense. The silence is broken only by the noise of the stream below and the cries of birds. And yet, it was here, at this inaccessible height, where even animals rarely enter, that two deer hunters discovered human remains. This was no random walk or picnic spot. The very geography of this site screamed that man was not meant to be here, much less stay here forever. Mountains can keep their secrets, but this discovery defied the very logic of survival and common sense. The find belonged to Judy Smith, a 50-year-old nurse who had disappeared from a comfortable hotel in Philadelphia, 970 kilometers away from this wilderness point. 970 kilometers of silence that left no trace. But the main mystery did not even lie in this monstrous distance. The problem was the climb itself. The forensic examination confirmed what her loved ones knew. Judy had severe chronic arthritis in her knees. It was a condition that made every step an ordeal. She could barely walk on the flat metropolitan asphalt, but somehow she managed to make that grueling, almost mountaineering climb up the mountain. Who or what made her overcome the unbearable pain and climb to the place where death awaited her? This story began not in the backwoods, but in the sterile cleanliness of Boston's Logan Airport, 5 months before the grisly discovery. On the 9th of April in 1997, Judy and her husband, successful Boston attorney Jeffrey Smith, were preparing for their first trip together since their marriage. They had been in a relationship for about 10 years, but had made the marriage official only 8 months earlier. Their destination was Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, where Jeffrey was scheduled to speak at a prestigious pharmaceutical conference. It was a rare opportunity for the couple to break out of routine, to combine his work with her interest in history. Judy, a nurse by profession, was an avid traveler and had long wanted to see America's historic shrines. Neither of them could have predicted that this trip would become a point of no return. However, the carefully planned itinerary faltered before the plane took off. At the airline's check-in desk, it turned out that Judy had forgotten her driver's license in the morning rush. In 1997, following recent changes in Federal Aviation Administration regulations, this document had become mandatory for proof of identity when boarding a flight. Jeffrey, bound by a tight conference schedule and commitments to the organizers, could not wait. He was forced to fly alone, leaving his wife to deal with the problem. Judy had to return home to get her documents and board a later flight. At that moment, fate separated them not only by distance, but also by time. A fateful window of uncertainty had formed. Later investigators, who probed the case with an obsession worthy of the best detective, called the incident bizarre. Judy Smith was not a distracted or inexperienced tourist. She was a 50-year-old woman, organized and frighteningly independent. Her medical career demanded precision and attention to detail. She had extensive travel experience, having traveled alone to Thailand and backpacked through Europe, where navigation and logistics were far more complicated. Forgetting a key document on a simple domestic trip was completely uncharacteristic of her. This mistake, accidental or deliberate, created a blind spot of hours. Hours in which Judy was alone in Boston, out of her husband's sight. Enough time to make a call that no one should have heard, or to take cash out of a safety deposit box that wasn't traceable. The incident also shed light on the dynamics of their relationship, a detail that would later become key. Judy's friend, Carolyn Dickey, would later make a shocking statement on air that would become the linchpin of one of the theories. She claimed that Jeffrey and Judy's marriage was very fragile at the time of her disappearance. This statement dramatically changes the narrative. It turns the mistake, with the certificate, from an oversight into an opportunity, and the trip to Philadelphia from a romantic holiday into a cover for escape. It gives Judy a motive for a future 970-kilometer jump. She could use her husband's conference as the perfect alibi to disappear and meet someone elsewhere. But at that moment, Jeffrey, already in Philadelphia, was waiting for his wife, unaware of such depths. Judy arrived in Philadelphia on the evening of the 9th of April. She reunited with her husband in the lobby of the DoubleTree Hotel, and it seemed that the morning's incident at the airport was completely over. As an apology for her oversight and the long wait, she brought Jeffrey flowers. That gesture, that small detail, would later become critical. The initial suspicions of the Philadelphia police, faced with the lack of evidence, were so strong that they questioned whether Judy had even made it to the city. However, her arrival and the very act of handing over the flowers were corroborated by at least 2 independent witnesses, a hotel employee and another conference attendee who saw them in the lobby. This testimony proved irrefutably that Judy Smith was in Philadelphia. The mystery begins here, within the walls of this hotel. The morning of the 10th of April in 1997 began mundanely, almost sterilely. Jeffrey Smith woke before his wife to eat breakfast in his room and prepare for his first session at the conference. The last time he had seen Judy, she was in the shower and getting ready to leave. Their plan for the day was simple and straightforward, like thousands of other tourists visiting the city. While Jeffrey would be busy with work, Judy, like any history buff, would go sightseeing. On her list were Independence Hall and the famous Liberty Bell, symbols of American nationhood. In the evening, they agreed to meet at a cocktail party at the hotel to spend the rest of the day together. The atmosphere was relaxed and the weather was conducive to walking. When Judy left the hotel room that morning, she reportedly took her signature red backpack with her. It wasn't just a wardrobe item. Judy almost never carried a regular woman's handbag, preferring this handy and roomy backpack. It was her constant companion on all her trips, part of her image as an independent traveler. The witnesses who saw her that day and her husband remembered it. That red rucksack would become one of the central silent witnesses in the case. It would disappear with her, and its absence at the scene where the body was found would become as important evidence as those that would be found. But that morning, nothing portended trouble. The city had a life of its own, and Judy Smith simply went out into the street to disappear into the crowd. Philadelphia in April is a bustling metropolis. Thousands of tourists with cameras, business people in suits, street vendors, and the constant noise of traffic. It's the perfect environment to get lost, but also the perfect environment to leave a digital or paper trail. CCTV cameras on banks, credit card receipts, witnesses in cafes and souvenir shops. Judy Smith, a confident 50-year-old English-speaking woman, was not supposed to just disappear without a single transaction. She wasn't in a wild forest or on an alien planet. She was in the center of one of America's largest cities, a few blocks from historic monuments visited by millions. The illusion of safety was absolute, but it was that illusion that would become the worst trap of all. The moment the hotel door closed behind her, the countdown began. The 10th of April in the year 1997 was approaching evening. Jeffrey Smith, having finished his business at the conference, returned to his DoubleTree hotel room. He expected to find his wife, perhaps tired after a long walk through the historic center, but ready to share her impressions. Instead, he was met with silence. The room was empty. In that first moment, there was no alarm yet, only a slight perplexity. Perhaps she had lingered in the gift shop or decided to grab a coffee. He checked his watch. The time was nearing the start of the cocktail party they had agreed to meet at. Jeffrey went down to the banquet hall, expecting to see her there, but Judy was not among the dozens of guests and colleagues. He walked around the lobby, checked the bar. It was empty. His first real worry turned to anxiety when he returned to the room again. All her things she hadn't taken on the walk were there. The suitcase, the makeup, the book she'd been reading. But Judy herself was gone. The phone was silent. He started calling hotel services, then the local hospitals, but no one could give him any information. The illusion of security, so solid even in the morning, had crumbled in a matter of hours. Judy's absence from a scheduled meeting was the trigger that turned an ordinary tourist trip into an emergency. As the hands of the clock ticked past late evening, Jeffrey Smith dialed the number of the Philadelphia police, and with that call began the first phase of a search that would very quickly become bogged down in chaos and contradictions. The police officers who arrived at the hotel at first regarded the situation with guarded skepticism. An adult had been missing for only a few hours. In a metropolis like Philadelphia, that most often meant a trivial quarrel or a loss of sense of time. They interviewed Jeffrey, wrote down Judy's description. 50-year-old white woman, medium height, brown hair, a special note, her signature, red rucksack. But as the night passed and Judy never showed up, the case began to take on a more sinister tone. The morning shift of detectives who had taken over the investigation already realized this wasn't just a lost hiker. This was an unexplained disappearance from the heart of the city that required the immediate deployment of a full-fledged search operation. The search operation in Philadelphia began with a methodical review of standard protocols. Detectives requested the hotel's surveillance tapes, but they yielded nothing of substance. They had seen Judy enter the hotel the day before, but her departure on the morning of the 10th of April did not appear on any footage. Police began combing the neighborhood, interviewing taxi drivers, cafe workers, historic preservationists. And this is where the investigation encountered the first and foremost obstacle that turned the search into a surreal nightmare. A problem that would later be dubbed narrative fog, or the doppelganger phenomenon. Instead of finding traces of Judy, rescuers and detectives encountered ghosts. In the same area of Philadelphia where Judy was sought, there was at least one, and possibly two, women strikingly similar to her. This confusion made it almost impossible to separate reliable evidence from false traces. The first to fall into this trap was Judy's son, Craig, who rushed to Philadelphia in search of his mother. He was combing the streets with the police when, from afar, he spotted a woman whose gait and silhouette made his heart stop. He was sure it was her. As he got closer, however, he realized with horror and disappointment that it was a homeless woman, disoriented and unrelated to his family. This incident not only drained the family's emotional resources, but also diverted the search team's valuable time. But that wasn't the only double. A private investigator hired by the Smith family for a parallel investigation reported another sighting. He spotted a well-dressed white woman who matched Judy's description outside a grocery shop in the early morning hours. She appeared confused, but was not in distress. The detective tried to talk to her, but she quickly walked away. Was it Judy? Or another mirage? Any reports of Judy Smith being seen in Philadelphia in a disoriented state almost certainly referred to these false targets. The police were stumped. They were looking for a needle in a haystack, but that haystack was filled with dozens of similar needles, and each one led nowhere. This chaos of evidence was the first unexplained contradiction. Judy was an experienced, independent person. Had she been lost or in trouble, her behavior would probably have been different. But instead of clear signs of kidnapping or accident, the searchers got only fog. Not a single ransom call. No witnesses who saw her struggle or her being put into a car. Her red backpack, such a prominent detail, seems to have vanished with her. The search in Philadelphia didn't just hit a dead end, they hit a wall of absurdity, where the very image of the woman they were looking for began to double and blur, as if the city was deliberately hiding her, giving detectives false reflections. While ground teams tried to cut through the fog of doppelgangers, another team of detectives worked on Judy's digital and financial trail. And the results of that work caused a second wave of shock. The result was zero, an absolute, sterile void. Judy Smith left the hotel as if she'd stepped into another dimension. None of her credit cards had been used. Not a single ATM withdrawal. Not a single car hire agreement had been made in her name. Not a single plane, train, or bus ticket was purchased. In an era when financial transactions were already becoming the digital shadow of the individual, Judy Smith was a digital ghost. This discovery threw the family and investigators into a daze. This behavior was unlike any of the standard theories. It was not like a stranded tourist desperately trying to contact someone or pay with a card. It didn't look like a robbery as her bills were left untouched. She had left about $500 in cash in the hotel room, but appeared to have taken about $200 more with her. That money, if she had it, had also not surfaced anywhere. This proved one of two things. Either Judy was immediately kidnapped and isolated from the outside world, or she was traveling voluntarily, using only cash and possibly in the company of someone who provided transport and logistics. The shock of this discovery was compounded by an inevitable twist in any investigation of this nature. The Philadelphia police began looking at her husband. Jeffrey Smith, been the last person to see her alive, was automatically under suspicion. Although he had spoken at the conference, his alibi was being scrutinized. Detectives asked him uncomfortable questions, and this created additional tension. The family, instead of uniting in the face of tragedy, was pressured by law enforcement. This toxic atmosphere of suspicion further complicated an already hopeless search. The hope of finding Judy alive in Philadelphia melted away with each passing day, turning into an agonizing expectation of the worst. Days passed, then weeks, and there was no word from Judy Smith. The search operation in Philadelphia was officially called off. Detectives had exhausted all leads. The narrative fog had dissipated, leaving behind nothing but a cold void. For the Smith family, the most agonizing period had arrived: uncertainty. They returned to Boston, to a home where everything reminded them of Judy, but there was no clarity about her fate. Son Craig described the state as a constant nightmare in which you don't know whether to grieve or hope. Judy Smith's case became a hang-up, one of many unsolved missing persons cases. Hope, if there was any, was buried under the weight of 5 months of silence. The summer of 1997 passed in this agonizing vacuum. And then, on the 7th of September, came the call that changed everything. The call didn't come from Philadelphia or Boston. It came from the sheriff's office in Buncombe County, North Carolina, 970 kilometers from the hotel where Judy had last been seen. On the other end of the wire, they reported that 2 men illegally hunting deer in the Pisgah National Forest had stumbled across skeletonized human remains. It was the threshold of irreversibility. The call instantly shifted the focus of the investigation. Search tactics no longer mattered. It was now a job for coroners and forensics. The operational loss was total. Not only could they not find her alive, they were looking for her in the completely wrong place. The whole operation in Philadelphia, all that chaos with the doppelgangers, turned out to be a tragic farce. A distraction while the real tragedy unfolded hundreds of miles to the south. The remains were found in a wild, mountainous area. The big question now was not, where is Judy, but how the hell did she get there? The call from North Carolina became an operational earthquake. An investigation that had been smoldering for 5 months in the archives of Philadelphia instantly moved 970 kilometers south into the jurisdiction of the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. The new task required immediate adaptation. This was no longer a search operation, but a highly complex forensic mission to recover remains from a hostile environment. The site indicated by the hunters was not by the roadside or on a hiking trail. It was located on a steep, almost sheer slope near Stony Fork Creek, a 20-minute, arduous hike from the nearest access point. The terrain was so treacherous that the first group sent to the site encountered physical resistance from nature. The team, made up of detectives and forensic experts, had to improvise, using climbing equipment to ensure safety. They literally clung to tree roots and slippery rocks to climb to the point where the remains lay. The atmosphere was oppressive. Detective Sam Constance, the lead investigator on the case, later recalled that every step was a risk. The danger was so real that one of the investigators, surveying the scene, slipped and suffered a serious sciatic nerve injury that required immediate hospitalization and subsequent surgery. This incident was not just an unfortunate accident, but a key, blood-chilling piece of evidence. If a trained police officer suffered a service-incompatible injury here, how did a 50-year-old woman with severe arthritis in her knee get here? This fact immediately changed the tactics of the investigation. Detective Constance having soberly assessed the situation, used this fact to cut off the versions. He ruled out Jeffrey Smith, Judy's husband, as the physical perpetrator of the crime. Jeffrey was described as an obese man, suffering from obesity, and the investigators came to the unequivocal conclusion that he was physically incapable of not only carrying the body, but of getting to the location himself. It also made it unlikely that Judy had been killed elsewhere and brought here. It was more likely that she herself, either voluntarily or under duress, had made the agonizing ascent and been killed there. This paradox begged the agonizing question: what was the force that made her climb this mountain? The crime scene was a chaotic scene. 5 months of exposure to the elements and wildlife had done their work. Judy Smith's remains were skeletonized and scattered across the slope. Forensic investigators had to literally sift through soil and foliage within a few meters to gather evidence. It was painstaking, grueling work under the harshest of conditions. Every bone fragment, every scrap of tissue was carefully packed. The identification was quick. Dental records and the distinctive arthritis marks on the knee joints left no doubt that this was the missing nurse from Boston. But once the identity was confirmed, the question of cause of death arose. Even on the skeletonized remains, forensic experts found clear and undeniable signs of violence. It wasn't an accident. It was a brutal murder. Similar cutting marks were found on the ribs, indicating that the assailant had used a knife. But the most gruesome discovery was made on the remains of her clothing. The bra she was wearing had multiple cuts and punctures, indicating a violent, repeated attack. Judy Smith wasn't just murdered, she was tortured. The Pisgah Forest became her execution site. Other items found on the slope were collected along with the remains. They were lying there as if they had either been thrown in a hurry or left behind deliberately. Next to the body was a pair of expensive sunglasses. A blue and black backpack, obviously not the red one she left the hotel in Philadelphia with, was found a little further away. Forensics also picked up a paperback detective novel. All of these items were foreign. They didn't fit Judy's image. They were props from someone else's life that were now part of her death. These findings turned the investigation from a simple murder case into a complex puzzle, where each piece contradicted the previous one. The real psychological breakthrough, the moment when the case finally went into the realm of the unexplainable, occurred during the identification of the items. Judy's family, her husband and adult children, were presented with the items found at the crime scene. Their reaction came as a shock to the investigators, which shaped the entire further investigation. They did not identify anything. None of the items found on the slope belonged to Judy Smith. They were not her clothes. She was wearing heavy hiking boots, blue jeans, and thermal underwear. These were clothes meant for a serious hike in the mountains, not for sightseeing in Philadelphia. This anomaly was central. It proved intentional. No one buys a full set of expensive hiking clothes during an 8-hour tour of the Liberty Bell. These clothes were purchased after disappearing from the hotel, and specifically for the Pisgah Forest hike. The disappearance from Philadelphia was only a prologue to the fatal encounter in North Carolina, for which she or her companion was preparing. For the family, it was an agonizing realization. The Judy they had known, the one who walked out of the hotel in city clothes, had nothing in common with the woman who had died on the mountain. And that wasn't all. The blue-black backpack was also unfamiliar to them. Her signature red backpack, her constant companion, had disappeared without a trace. It had been replaced by this one, a stranger's, and finally, the sunglasses. Expensive ball of sunglasses worth $110. The family confirmed they didn't belong to her. We see a clear, almost ritualistic theme of substitution. Judy's identity, her red backpack, her city clothes, has been erased and replaced with the killer's props. These items most likely belonged to her unknown companion, were either lent to her for the hike or simply abandoned at the scene of the crime. An investigation in North Carolina has hit a dead end. The killer left no trace. The clothes and glasses were bought with cash. And then investigators, desperate to find any clue in those 5 months of silence, began pulling up old, unsolved cases and reports of strange occurrences in the Asheville area for April and May. And they found something that sent a chill down my spine. It turned out that, while Philadelphia was looking for lookalikes and checking credit cards, something strange was happening in the Asheville area, in close proximity to where the body would eventually be found. Local investigators deemed the sightings credible. Shortly after Judy's disappearance in April, at least 2 witnesses in the Asheville area reported seeing a woman who matched her description. She didn't look like an abduction victim. She was driving a gray sedan. The origin of that vehicle remains one of the major mysteries of the case. Witnesses added another surreal detail. The gray sedan was full of boxes and bags. In one instance, a woman pulled up to a local campsite and asked the owner if she could sleep in her car on the property. Having been refused, she quietly drove off. This is not a portrait of a camper. It is a portrait of a man on the run, living on wheels. But the most important testimony came from Joanne Stucker, a clerk in the gift shop. Stucker recalled in detail a conversation with a woman she believed to be Judy. According to her, the woman was very alert and very pleasant, showing no signs of fear or disorientation. Moreover, the woman voluntarily entered the conversation, gave her own name, Judy, and told the same story Jeffrey had told the police in Philadelphia. She was from Boston, her lawyer husband was currently at a conference, and she just decided to go to the Asheville area. That testimony turned the whole case upside down. She was not a victim. She was in control and actively used the cover, her husband's conference, to explain her presence in North Carolina. It was these testimonies that gave the investigation a new, shocking point of reference. The final touch to this surreal portrait was added by the owner of a local grocery store. He reported that a woman who arrived in a gray sedan had made a very specific and unexplained purchase. She bought $30 worth of sandwiches and a toy truck. Judy's children were adults. Why would she need a toy? This detail seems almost fictional. Some have suggested it's a sign of psychosis, but a more plausible analysis focuses on both parts of the purchase. $30 for sandwiches in '97 is a provision for several people. Both the sandwiches, food, and the truck, symbolic gift, were for her unknown companion, probably a trucker. Evidence of a perky woman in a gray sedan buying a toy truck was the key to Detective Sam Constance's most plausible, but also most disturbing theory. Those footprints, however, were ghostly. They surfaced months later and led nowhere. The gray sedan was never found. The identity of the companion for whom the sandwiches and toy may have been intended remained a mystery. The investigation hit a wall again, but this time the wall was built of paradoxes. The most important of these was motive. Robbery had been completely ruled out. In the blue and black backpack found at the scene, forensics found $167 in cash. Her wedding ring was also in place. The calculations were staggering. Judy had taken about $200 with her, spent about $33 at the grocery store. The balance was in her backpack. The killer wasn't interested in money. The motive was personal. As the active phase of the investigation winded down and the case became covered in archival dust, it acquired 3 main theories, each of which attempted to explain what had happened, but were shattered by the facts. The first inescapable theory, the husband, Jeffrey Smith. He had a tenuous marriage motive, and the Philadelphia police never officially cleared him. But he had an alibi for the conference, and, more importantly, his physical condition made it impossible for him to climb that mountain. The second theory, a ghost from the woods. Authorities began to consider a connection to Gary Michael Hilton, the national park serial killer who preyed on hikers in the same woods. The body of one of his victims was found in the same Pisgah forest. But the problem was timing. Hilton's famous series of murders began exactly 10 years after Judy's death. If it was him, Judy was his very first victim, after which he lay low for a decade. The operation to investigate the death of Judy Smith has officially ended, but it has not provided answers. The case remains unsolved because it is a perfect tapestry of inconsistencies. It is a story in which every fact contradicts another. How was an experienced, assertive nurse with severe arthritis able to climb a slope that traumatized a trained investigator? Why did her personal, branded belongings disappear, and in their place were left expensive foreign props, hiking boots, bulle sunglasses, and a blue rucksack? And what did that strange grocery store purchase mean? The only theory that ties everything together is one that has never been proven. Judy Smith was not kidnapped. She voluntarily and secretly traveled to Asheville to meet someone she knew, someone she trusted enough to go camping in the wild mountains. And that someone killed her. We never found out who took her life, but perhaps the most important mystery is who Judy Smith really was in those last days in the gray sedan, 970 kilometers from her past life.